Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight, we'll drift into the peninsula that reaches like a dreaming hand into the Mediterranean, where ancient seas carved limestone cathedrals beneath the earth, and volcanic breath still warms mountain springs. Italy is geography written in marble and basalt, a land where tectonic plates compose symphonies in stone, where islands emerge from waters that remember Phoenician sails, and where every valley holds the memory of glaciers or the promise of thermal waters. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. The town of Viganella in Piedmont sits in such a deep alpine valley that winter transforms it into a place of perpetual twilight. For 83 days each year, from November through February, the sun traces its arc across the sky, but never climbs high enough to clear the surrounding peaks. The mountains that cradle this settlement rise so steeply that they create a natural sundial in reverse, marking not the passage of light, but its absence. The villagers lived this way for 8 centuries, their winters measured in shadows and reflected light, until modern engineering offered a solution that seems pulled from mythology. They installed a computer-controlled mirror on the mountainside, a sheet of polished steel 40 square meters wide that tracks the sun's movement and reflects its rays down into the town square. Now, for a few hours each winter day, borrowed sunlight warms the piazza, where children play in illumination that has traveled an extra kilometer to reach them, bouncing off the mountain like light off the moon. Lake Resia in South Tyrol holds a secret beneath its emerald waters that emerges like a question mark against the sky. The lake itself is artificial, created in 1950 when engineers built a dam that merged 3 natural lakes into one reservoir 6 kilometers long. But before the waters rose, there was a village called Graun, home to 163 houses and 1,000 years of history. The residents were relocated, their homes demolished, their streets submerged beneath billions of liters of alpine water. Yet one structure refused to disappear completely. The bell tower of Graun's 14th century church still stands, rising 20 meters above the surface, its weathered stones and empty windows creating one of Europe's most haunting landmarks. In winter, when the lake freezes solid enough to walk on, visitors traverse the ice to touch this solitary monument to vanished geography. The bells were removed before the flooding, but locals say that on quiet nights, some still hear ringing from beneath the waters, though whether this is wind through the tower or something more mysterious, no one can say with certainty. The Dolomites contain a secret that transforms our understanding of mountains themselves. These peaks, reaching 343 meters at Marmolada, are not born of volcanic fire or tectonic collision in the traditional sense, but rather from the accumulated remains of coral reefs that thrived here 250 million years ago. During the Triassic period, this region lay beneath a tropical sea called Tethys, where conditions perfectly matched those of today's Bahamas. Countless generations of coral polyps built their calcium carbonate skeletons in warm, shallow waters, creating massive reef structures that would eventually become mountains. You can still find fossilized shells, ancient sea urchins, and coral formations embedded in rocks at elevations where only eagles dare to nest. The distinctive pale color of dolomite rock, that luminous white pink that glows at sunrise and sunset, comes from the mineral composition of these ancient sea creatures, transformed by time and pressure into magnesium calcium carbonate. When climbers scale these vertical walls, they're ascending through layers of prehistoric ocean, their handholds formed by organisms that never knew dry land existed. Civita di Bagnoregio stands as a testament to geography's slow violence, a town that dies a little more each year. Perched atop a plateau of volcanic tuff, this ancient settlement watches itself disappear, grain by grain, into the valley below. The erosion is relentless and measurable, approximately 7 centimeters annually, carved away by wind and rain that find the soft volcanic rock an easy victim. The edges of the plateau crumble like old bread, taking with them gardens, pathways, and occasionally entire buildings that tumble into the canyons below. Founded by the Etruscans 2,500 years ago, Civita has shrunk from a thriving medieval town to an island of stone houses clustered around a small square. Only 14 permanent residents remain, guardians of a place that exists in a constant state of geographic farewell. A single footbridge, 300 meters long and suspended high above the eroded badlands, provides the only access, a concrete umbilical cord connecting this dying town to the stable geology of the modern world. Visitors who cross this bridge enter not just a medieval village, but a geography lesson in impermanence. The island of Monte Cristo floats in the Tyrrhenian Sea like a fortress of granite and silence, 60 kilometers south of Elba. This pyramid of rock, rising 645 meters from the Mediterranean, guards its secrets jealously, permitting only 1,000 visitors each year to walk its ancient paths. The restrictions exist not to preserve human history, but to protect a unique ecosystem that evolved in isolation. Here lives the Monte Cristo viper, a snake found nowhere else on Earth, its venom and patterns distinct from its mainland cousins after millennia of separation. The island's forests of holm oak shelter mouflon sheep introduced by prehistoric humans, now wild and wary, their curved horns silhouetted against ridges where monks once sought salvation in solitude. Even the plants here tell stories of isolation, with endemic species that adapted to this granite world surrounded by salt. The monastery of San Mamiliano, founded in the 5th century, crumbles slowly on the eastern slope, its stones returning to the mountain that provided them, while the treasure that Alexandre Dumas imagined hidden here remains, like the island itself, more mysterious in reality than any fiction could make it. Beneath the bustling streets of Naples lies another city entirely, a negative space carved from solid rock that extends for 450 kilometers through darkness and silence. This underground labyrinth began with the Greeks, who discovered that the yellow tough stone beneath their settlement was soft enough to excavate yet strong enough to support the city above. They carved cisterns and aqueducts, creating a hydraulic system that would serve Naples for 2 millennia. The Romans expanded these tunnels, adding bathhouses and reservoirs, while early Christians transformed chambers into catacombs and churches. During World War II, these ancient spaces sheltered thousands from Allied bombing, with entire families living for months in caverns that maintain a constant temperature of 15 degrees Celsius, regardless of the season above. Today, 40 meters below the modern city, you can walk through Greek corridors, where tool marks from bronze chisels remain visible on the walls, past Roman cisterns that once held millions of liters of water, through medieval chambers where smugglers hid contraband, into spaces that have witnessed every era of human civilization, yet remain essentially unchanged, immune to time's passage in their volcanic cocoon. The island of Stromboli performs a rhythm that predates human memory, an eruption every 15 to 20 minutes that has continued without significant pause for over 2,000 years. This consistency earned it the ancient title, Lighthouse of the Mediterranean, as sailors navigated by the glow of its lava fountains, throwing incandescent bombs into the night sky. The volcano rises 924 meters above sea level, But this is merely the visible portion of a massive structure that extends 2,000 meters below the waves to the seafloor. What makes Stromboli unique among volcanoes is not its power, but its persistence. Its magma chamber, maintaining just enough pressure to create continuous small explosions without building toward catastrophic release. The indigenous name, Strombolicchio, means small round one, though there's nothing small about a mountain that breathes fire with the regularity of a sleeping giant. On the Sciara del Fuoco, the stream of fire, lava flows create a black sand highway down the northwestern flank, where molten rock meets the sea in clouds of steam, adding new land to the island grain by cooling grain, an endless conversation between fire and water. Lake Carezza in the South Tyrolean Alps holds colors that seem borrowed from dreams rather than geology. This small alpine lake, barely 300 meters at its longest point, displays hues of turquoise and emerald so vivid that locals named it Lek de Ergobando, the Rainbow Lake. The extraordinary colors arise from minerals dissolved from the surrounding Latemar mountain range, particularly magnesium and calcium carbonates that scatter light in ways that transform water into liquid gemstone. The lake has no visible tributaries, fed instead by underground springs that emerge from the dolomite bedrock, their flow varying so dramatically with seasons that the lake nearly disappears in winter, only to resurrect itself with snowmelt each spring. Behind the water, the jagged peaks of the Latemar group create a reflected crown, their pale dolomite faces doubling in the mirror surface when winds are still. Local legend speaks of a wizard who tried to capture a water nymph by creating a rainbow that touched the lake's surface, but when she discovered his deception, she shattered the rainbow into the water, where its colors remain trapped forever, which explains, perhaps better than any scientific theory, why this water holds light differently than any other mountain lake. The Marmor Falls near Terni Cascade 165 meters in 3 separate drops, but their existence is entirely artificial, a testament to Roman engineering ambition that reshaped geography itself. In 271 BCE, Consul Manius Curius Dentatus faced a problem that had plagued the Rieti Valley for centuries. The Velino River ended in marshlands that bred malaria and made agriculture impossible. His solution was to dig a channel through solid rock, diverting the river over a cliff edge and into the Nera River below. This created not just drainage, but one of Europe's most powerful waterfalls, a controlled catastrophe of water that has thundered for over 2 millennia. The falls have been modified many times, with Renaissance engineers adjusting the flow and industrial age builders adding channels, but the fundamental Roman design remains. Today, the water serves hydroelectric plants and is released on a schedule, turning this ancient engineering project into a performance that happens twice daily. When the gates open, 15 cubic meters of water per second transform a modest cliff into a roaring cascade that throws mist hundreds of meters into the air, creating rainbows that arc across the gorge. Sardinia's landscape is punctuated by over 7,000 nuraghi towers, truncated stone cones that rise from hillsides and valleys like geometric mushrooms sprouting from ancient soil. The Su-Nuraxi complex at Barumini represents the apex of this mysterious architecture, built from basalt blocks between 1900 and 730 BCE without mortar, yet standing firm against 3 millennia of earthquakes and erosion. These structures, unique to Sardinia, were created by a civilization that left no written records, only these stone testimonies to their engineering prowess. The central tower at Su-Nuraxi originally stood 18 meters tall, surrounded by 4 subsidiary towers connected by walls that created a labyrinth of passages and chambers. The basalt was quarried from nearby volcanic flows, each block shaped to interlock with its neighbors in a technique that distributed weight so effectively that many nuraghi have outlasted Roman monuments built 1,000 years later. Archaeological evidence suggests these weren't simply fortresses, but complex social centers where bronze was smelted, grain was stored, and religious ceremonies connected earth to sky through vertical architecture that seems to anticipate medieval castle design by 2 millennia. Lake Trasimeno harbors floating islands that drift across its surface like sleeping leviathans made of vegetation and time. These islands form when decomposed plant matter, particularly reeds and water lilies, creates thick mats of organic material that break free from the shoreline during storms. Over years, these floating platforms accumulate enough soil and seeds to support entire ecosystems. Trees grow on some of these natural rafts, their roots dangling through the organic mat into the water below, creating hanging gardens that move with the wind. The largest of these islands can support the weight of several people, though walking on them feels like traversing a waterbed made of earth. Local fishermen have names for the regular ones, tracking their slow migrations across the lake's 128 square kilometers. Some islands persist for decades, growing larger and more complex each year, while others dissolve in winter storms, their component parts recycling into new formations. This phenomenon turns Lake Trasimeno into an ever-changing map, where solid land becomes liquid and fixed geography refuses to remain still, challenging our assumption that islands must be anchored to the earth below. Mount Etna grows taller with each passing century, a mountain that refuses to accept its final form. Currently standing at 3,357 meters, Europe's most active volcano adds approximately 30 meters to its height every 100 years through accumulated lava flows and ash deposits. This growth isn't uniform or predictable. Sometimes violent eruptions destroy summit craters and reduce the height temporarily, only for subsequent activity to build it back higher than before. The volcano covers an area larger than London, its base measuring 140 kilometers in circumference, making it less a single mountain than a complex of overlapping volcanic structures built over 500,000 years of activity. What makes Etna remarkable among volcanoes is its accessibility and persistence. Unlike volcanoes that sleep for centuries between catastrophic awakenings, Etna maintains almost continuous activity, with strombolian explosions, lava fountains, and ash emissions that local residents have learned to live with, as others might accept seasonal storms. The fertile volcanic soils on its slopes support vineyards that produce wine from grapes grown at elevations where most plants struggle to survive, creating vintages that literally taste of volcanic minerals, sulfur, and ancient fire. The blue Grotto of Capri illuminates from within, as if the sea itself has learned to glow. This sea cave, 60 meters long and 25 meters wide, transforms sunlight into liquid azure through a remarkable accident of geology. The illumination comes from sunlight entering through an underwater opening, larger than the small entrance boats squeeze through at the waterline. The light filters through the seawater, which absorbs red wavelengths while allowing blue to pass, then reflects off the white sandy bottom and limestone walls, creating a luminescence that seems supernatural. Roman emperors understood this magic, decorating the cave with statues of sea gods and nymphs, some of which were recovered in 1964, their marble forms worn smooth by 2 millennia of waves. The intensity of the blue light varies with conditions outside. On sunny days when the sea is calm, the grotto becomes almost unbearably bright with blue radiance, while clouded skies create a more subdued glow, like viewing the world through thick blue glass. The ancient Romans built a narrow walkway around the cave's interior, now submerged due to bradycism, the slow rising and sinking of the earth that affects this volcanic region. Val d'Orcia's white clay hills, called Crete Senesi, spread across southern Tuscany like a landscape from another planet. These badlands formed from ancient seabed sediments laid down when this region was submerged beneath Pliocene seas 5 million years ago. As the seas retreated and the land rose, erosion began sculpting the clay into smooth, undulating forms that change color with the seasons. In summer, the clay bakes white under the Tuscan sun, creating a lunar landscape interrupted only by solitary farmhouses and lines of cypress trees that seem to have been placed by an artist's hand rather than nature's randomness. When rain falls, the clay transforms, becoming gray-blue and developing a network of tiny ravines that channel water in dendritic patterns resembling aerial views of river deltas. The soil here is nearly sterile, too dense with clay for most plants to penetrate, which explains the isolated cypresses that mark ancient property boundaries or graveyards, their roots having found rare cracks in the clay armor. This geological poverty created unexpected beauty, a minimalist landscape that Renaissance painters found irresistible. Its simple geometries of hill, tree, and sky becoming the backdrop for countless depictions of biblical and mythological scenes. The island of Lampedusa lies closer to Africa than Europe, a limestone raft floating between continents. At 113 kilometers from Tunisia and 205 kilometers from Sicily, this southernmost point of Italy belongs geologically to the African continental shelf, a piece of Africa politically attached to Europe. The island's beaches, particularly the Spiaggia dei Conigli, consist of white sand identical to Caribbean shores, created from countless generations of marine organisms ground fine by waves. Here, loggerhead sea turtles arrive each summer to nest, following magnetic memories that guide them to the exact beaches where they were born, one of the last Mediterranean sites where these ancient navigators still reproduce. The island's position makes it a biological frontier where African and European species meet. Plants from both continents grow side by side, while birds use Lampedusa as a refueling station during migrations across the Mediterranean. The surrounding waters are so clear that boats appear to float in air, the seafloor visible at depths of 30 meters, creating an illusion of levitation that photographers struggle to capture and viewers struggle to believe. Lake Como plunges to depths that rival ocean trenches, its Y-shaped basin carved by glaciers that retreated 10,000 years ago, leaving a wound in the earth 410 meters deep. This makes it one of Europe's deepest lakes, its bottom lying below sea level despite being surrounded by Alps that rise 2,000 meters above its surface. The glaciers that carved this abyss were part of the Adda Glacier system, rivers of ice over a kilometer thick that ground through solid rock with patient, crushing force. The lake's unusual Y-shape, with branches extending toward Como, Lecco, and Colico, resulted from multiple glacial flows converging and diverging, each carving its own valley before melting away. The depth creates unique conditions where the bottom waters never mix completely with the surface, maintaining different temperatures and oxygen levels that support distinct ecosystems at various depths. Roman writers described Como as having two separate lakes stacked vertically, an observation that modern limnology confirms. The deepest parts remain largely unexplored, their waters too dark and cold for casual investigation, holding sediments that preserve a detailed record of climate changes, volcanic eruptions, and human activity spanning millennia, a library written in mud that scientists have only begun to read. The Prosecco hills between Valdobbiadene and Conegliano rise in perfectly arranged rows of vines that follow contours established by ancient seas. These limestone slopes contain millions of marine fossils, evidence that this now elevated wine country once lay beneath warm Miocene waters. The fossils aren't mere curiosities, but active participants in wine production, as the limestone soil they create provides perfect drainage and mineral content for Glera grapes. When you drink Prosecco, you taste the transformation of prehistoric ocean into sparkling wine, calcium carbonate from ancient shells contributing to the wine's distinctive minerality. The steep slopes, some approaching 70 degrees, require all work to be done by hand, a tradition called siglioni, where dry stone walls create tiny terraces barely wide enough for a single row of vines. These walls, built without mortar from the same fossil-rich limestone, prevent erosion while radiating stored heat to the vines at night. Some sections of these hills are so steep that workers use monorails to transport grapes during harvest. Tiny cable cars carrying fruit that grew where ocean floor became mountain. Time measured not in vintages, but in geological epochs, compressed into each bubble that rises through golden wine. Venice rests on foundations that shouldn't exist, a city built on water that has defied gravity and logic for over a millennium. The lagoon city stands on 118 islands, but these islands are largely artificial, created and maintained by human intervention. Beneath the palaces and piazzas lie millions of wooden poles, primarily larch and oak from forests in Slovenia and Croatia, driven deep into the lagoon mud until they hit solid clay. These poles, preserved perfectly in the oxygen-poor sediment, have petrified over centuries into something approaching stone hardness. The wood came from forests specifically managed for Venice, trees selected for their straight growth and resistance to rot. Each major building required thousands of these poles. The Church of Santa Maria della Salute alone stands on 106,657 wooden stakes, creating a forest beneath the water that mirrors the forest that once grew above it. The Venetians developed techniques for driving these poles that modern engineers still struggle to understand, achieving density and stability that has supported massive stone buildings for 1,000 years. As sea levels rise and the city slowly sinks, these ancient wooden foundations continue their impossible task, holding Renaissance palaces above waters that should have claimed them centuries ago. The Furlow Gorge and Marsh preserves Roman ambition carved directly into mountain stone. Here, in 76 CE, Emperor Vespasian ordered his engineers to tunnel through solid rock rather than build another precarious road along the cliff face. The resulting tunnel, 38 meters long and 8 meters high, was chiseled by hand through limestone that had resisted erosion for millions of years. Roman soldiers and slaves worked with bronze tools and fire-setting techniques, heating the rock, then cooling it rapidly with vinegar to create cracks they could exploit. The precision of their work remains visible in the tool marks that pattern the tunnel walls, each strike of hammer on chisel preserved in stone like ancient writing. Above the tunnel, you can still see the remains of the earlier road built by Consul Flaminius in 217 BCE, a narrow ledge that claimed so many travelers that Vespasian decided geography itself must be conquered. The tunnel has carried traffic continuously for nearly 2,000 years, its dimensions perfect for Roman carts and modern cars alike. The gorge itself, carved by the Candigliano River through Jurassic limestone, creates acoustic conditions that amplify sound, so that conversations in the tunnel can be heard clearly hundreds of meters away, turning Roman engineering into an inadvertent whispering gallery. The thermal waters of Saturnia emerge from deep within Tuscany's volcanic heart at exactly 37.5 degrees Celsius, the same temperature as human blood, as if the earth itself shares our warmth. This perpetual spring flows at 800 liters per second from fractures in travertine rock, water that began its journey as rain on Monte Amiata before descending through volcanic stone where it absorbs sulfur and minerals over centuries of underground wandering. The cascade at Cascate del Mulino has carved natural pools into white travertine terraces, creating a limestone staircase where thermal water spills from level to level in veils of steam that rise in the cool morning air. These waters have flowed without pause for millennia, maintaining their precise temperature through volcanic heat that neither intensifies nor diminishes. Romans built baths here, understanding that this water possessed qualities beyond mere warmth. The sulfur content, though strong enough to tarnish silver jewelry in minutes, creates a therapeutic soup that has drawn bathers for 3,000 years. Even in winter, when snow dusts the surrounding hills, these pools maintain their blood warmth, creating an oasis where the boundary between body and earth dissolves in mineral-rich water that matches our own internal seas. Castelluccio di Norcia sits at 1,452 meters on a plateau that transforms each June into a living painting called the Fioritura. This highland plain, carved by glaciers and polished by winds, supports a unique agricultural tradition of lentil cultivation that inadvertently creates one of nature's most spectacular displays. When early summer arrives, the lentils bloom alongside wildflowers that have grown here since before human memory. Poppies paint swathes of red, cornflowers add pools of blue, wild mustard creates rivers of yellow, and countless other species contribute their colors to a canvas that stretches for kilometers. The phenomenon occurs because traditional farming methods here prohibit herbicides, allowing wildflowers to thrive among the crops. The exact timing and intensity of the Fioritura varies each year, dependent on winter snowfall, spring rains, and May temperatures, making each display unique and unrepeatable. The plateau itself, called Piano Grande, sits like a bowl surrounded by the Sibillini Mountains, creating a natural amphitheater where this chromatic performance plays out against peaks that still carry snow, while the valley floor explodes in color. From above, the fields resemble an impressionist painting, with colors that shift and blend as winds move through the flowers, creating waves of hue that roll across the landscape. The island of Budelli in the Maddalena archipelago guards a beach of pink sand, Spiaggia Rosa, created from countless fragments of microscopic marine life mixed with granite crystals. The distinctive color comes primarily from Miniacina miniatia, a foraminifer that builds a red skeleton smaller than a grain of rice. When these organisms die, waves grind their remains into sand that mixes with white quartz and black mica from weathered granite, creating a rosy blend found nowhere else in the Mediterranean. The beach exists in such delicate balance that human footprints could destroy it. Since 1994, visitors have been forbidden from setting foot on the sand, allowed only to admire from boats that anchor beyond a protective buoy line. The French businessman who bought the island in 2016 was forced to sell it back to the Italian government, which declared the pink beach a monument to nature's artistry. The color intensity changes with moisture and light, appearing almost white when dry under midday sun, then deepening to salmon pink when wet, or viewed in the golden hour before sunset. This single cove, barely 100 meters long, represents millions of years of specific conditions that cannot be replicated: the right organisms, the perfect granite, the exact wave action, all combining to create sand the color of dawn. Lake Garda creates a microclimate so unusual that lemon trees flourish at the foot of the Alps, the northernmost citrus cultivation in the world at 45 degrees latitude. This shouldn't be possible. Citrus trees belong to Mediterranean coasts, not alpine foothills where winter snow typically destroys tropical plants. But Lake Garda, Italy's largest lake, acts as a massive thermal battery, absorbing summer heat and releasing it slowly through winter, moderating temperatures along its shores. The lake contains 50 cubic kilometers of water that rarely drops below 6 degrees Celsius, even in the depths of winter, creating rising air currents that protect the narrow coastal strip from frost. Medieval monks first recognized this phenomenon, building limonea, specialized greenhouses with tall stone pillars and removable wooden roofs that could be adjusted seasonally. These structures, some still standing in Limone sul Garda, created vertical gardens where lemon trees grew in terraces stepping up mountainsides. The wooden beams and glass panels would be installed each November and removed in April, protecting trees that produced fruit for Northern European nobility who paid extraordinary prices for lemons that seemed to grow from snow. Today, these historical lemon groves survive more as monuments to human ingenuity than commercial enterprises, their ancient trees still producing fruit in defiance of latitude. The Orido di Begliano near Lake Como channels the Pioverna torrent through a gorge so narrow that opposing walls nearly touch, creating a geological whisper that has lasted millennia. The water has carved through conglomerate rock, a natural concrete of pebbles and sand compressed into stone, finding every weakness and exploiting every crack until it created a serpentine channel that corkscrews through solid rock. Metal walkways now allow visitors to traverse this gorge, suspended above water that has polished the rock walls to mirror smoothness. In places, the passage narrows to less than a meter wide, forcing the river into violent eddies and whirlpools that have carved perfect circular pools called giant's kettles. The sound in these confined spaces becomes almost tangible, a roar that vibrates through bone and steel walkway alike. The gorge tells a story of patience, of water's soft persistence against stone's hard resistance, a battle measured in geological time where the eventual victor was never in doubt. Light enters only at midday, when sun angles directly down between the walls, creating brief moments of illumination in a world that exists mostly in shadow and spray, where ferns grow from impossible cracks and the air tastes of minerals dissolved from ancient stone. Matera's Sassi districts occupy caves that humans have called home for 9 millennia, making them among Earth's oldest continuously inhabited settlements. These dwellings weren't built so much as revealed, carved from the soft tufa rock of a ravine created by the Gravina River. The caves extend deep into the hillside, maintaining constant temperatures that provided warmth in winter and cooling in summer, long before humans understood thermodynamics. Each cave connects to others through passages and stairs cut directly from rock, creating a 3-dimensional city where streets run above and below each other, where someone's floor might be another's ceiling. Early inhabitants discovered that the tufa rock was soft enough to carve with simple tools, yet hardened when exposed to air, allowing them to create elaborate facades that made caves appear as conventional buildings. Water collection systems carved into rock channeled rain into cisterns that still function today, an engineering feat that provided water to a city built in a gorge. By the 1950s, the Sassi had become symbols of poverty, their inhabitants relocated to modern housing. But the caves endured, and now these ancient dwellings have been reborn as hotels and restaurants. Their stone chambers that once sheltered Neolithic families, now welcoming visitors who sleep where humanity first learned to shape stone into shelter. The Po Delta advances into the Adriatic Sea like a living creature extending tentacles of sediment, growing approximately 70 meters each year through deposits carried from the Alps. This river, Italy's longest at 652 kilometers, transports 13 million tons of sediment annually, material eroded from mountains and dissolved from plains, rebuilding the coastline grain by grain. The delta didn't exist in Roman times. Ancient ports like Adria now lie 25 kilometers inland, stranded by the river's relentless land building. The process creates a constantly shifting maze of channels, sandbars, and wetlands, where the boundary between land and sea remains perpetually uncertain. New islands appear after floods, while others vanish in storms, creating a geography that cartographers struggle to map accurately. The sediment comes from as far as Mont Blanc and the Matterhorn, alpine granite ground to powder by glaciers, beginning journeys that end in Adriatic mud. This process has accelerated since medieval deforestation increased erosion, turning the Po Delta into one of Europe's fastest-growing landscapes. Rice fields now grow where Renaissance ships once anchored, and roads run across land that didn't exist when Galileo studied the stars, making this delta a testament to geography's refusal to remain still. Mount Vesuvius sleeps fitfully above Naples, its crater a bowl of unstable rock 600 meters across and 300 meters deep, lined with fumaroles that release steam at 400 degrees Celsius. This isn't the same crater that destroyed Pompeii. That summit was obliterated in 79 CE, and the current cone grew from eruptions that followed, most recently reshaped by the 1944 eruption that Allied soldiers watched while liberating Italy. The crater changes constantly, with rockfalls and small collapses altering its geometry monthly. The fumaroles paint abstract art on the rocks, depositing yellow sulfur crystals and white calcium formations that create an alien landscape within the crater rim. On cold mornings, the temperature differential creates clouds that fill the crater like a witch's cauldron, hiding the depths until sun and wind clear the vapor. Scientists monitor this crater obsessively, installing instruments that measure every tremor and gas emission, knowing that 3 million people live within range of the next eruption. The volcano's current quiet is deceptive. Its magma chamber, detected through seismic imaging, lies just 8 kilometers below the surface, a pool of liquid rock waiting for the right conditions to rise. Walking the crater rim, you traverse rocks still warm to touch, windows into Earth's interior metabolism. The Apuan Alps contain Europe's most extensive marble caves, over 1,200 caverns threading through mountains that provided stone for Michelangelo's David. The Antro del Corchia complex extends 70 kilometers through these marble mountains, passages carved by water that found marble more soluble than most suppose. Unlike limestone caves that form through simple dissolution, marble caves require specific conditions of temperature and acidity that exist in few places on Earth. The passages here descend to depths of 1,200 meters through marble that ranges from pure white to gray with gold veining, creating chambers that seem carved from frozen milk. Water has polished some passages to mirror brightness, while in others, it has left rough surfaces that sparkle with crystalline faces. The marble formed 200 million years ago from compressed sea organisms, then metamorphosed under heat and pressure when Africa collided with Europe. Now water reverses this process, dissolving the marble grain by grain, carrying dissolved calcium carbonate deeper underground, where it might precipitate as flowstone or disappear entirely into underground rivers. Speleologists exploring these caves find new passages yearly, suggesting the known network represents a fraction of what exists, an invisible world beneath mountains that have provided humanity's finest sculpting stone for 2 millennia. Rocca Calascio Fortress in Abruzzo stands at 1,460 meters, crowning a limestone peak that glows golden in the late afternoon sun. This elevation makes it the highest fortification in the Apennines, built not for kings or nobles, but for shepherds, protecting their flocks during transhumance, the seasonal movement of sheep between summer and winter pastures. The fortress consists entirely of white limestone quarried from the mountain it stands upon, making it appear as if the peak simply grew a geometric crown. Construction began in the 10th century, with walls following the natural contours of the rock so precisely that fortress and mountain merge seamlessly. The limestone here contains iron oxide that oxidizes differently depending on exposure, creating a palette of whites, creams, and golds that shift with changing light. From the fortress walls, visibility extends for 50 kilometers on clear days, allowing shepherds to track weather, wolves, and rival flocks across the Grand Sasso Massif. The fortress was abandoned after a 1703 earthquake, but the limestone construction has proven more durable than its human builders expected. Wind and weather have barely eroded the stone, which hardens with exposure, ensuring this shepherd's castle will crown its mountain for centuries to come. The island of Ischia conceals 69 fumarole fields and 29 thermal spring groups above a magma chamber that rests just 2 kilometers beneath the surface. This proximity to liquid rock makes Ischia one of Europe's most thermally active islands, where beach sand can burn bare feet and cooking happens in holes dug in the ground. The thermal activity isn't uniform, but follows fault lines that crisscross the island, creating a patchwork of hot zones where temperatures range from barely warm to literally boiling. At Morante Beach, fumaroles heat the sand to 100 degrees Celsius, creating natural saunas where locals bury themselves to treat arthritis. The thermal waters emerge with different mineral compositions depending on their underground journey, some rich in sulfur, others in radon, iron, or salt, creating a natural pharmacy that Romans cataloged 2,000 years ago. The entire island occasionally rises and falls through bradycism, the breathing of the earth caused by magma movement, with the port of Ischia showing Roman columns now submerged, indicating the island has sunk 4 meters since classical times. Gardens thrive in volcanic soil heated from below, producing tomatoes in winter and tropical plants that shouldn't survive at this latitude, making Ischia a thermal greenhouse floating in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Lake Tovel in Trentino once performed an annual miracle that ceased without explanation, leaving scientists with a mystery that remains unsolved. Until 1964, this alpine lake turned blood red each summer, a transformation so dramatic that medieval witnesses thought it supernatural. The color came from an algae called Tovelia sanguinea, found nowhere else on Earth, which would bloom in massive numbers when water temperatures reached specific thresholds. The algae contained carotenoid pigments that turned the entire lake surface crimson, creating reflections that painted surrounding cliffs pink. Then, in 1964, the phenomenon stopped. The lake remained its normal blue-green, and despite water conditions appearing identical to previous years, the red algae never bloomed again. Scientists have proposed theories ranging from subtle temperature changes to alterations in nutrient flow, but none fully explain why an algae that thrived for recorded centuries suddenly vanished. The lake still contains Tovelia sanguinea in small numbers, visible under microscopes, but never again in quantities sufficient to paint the water red. Local legends offered their own explanation, claiming the lake turned red with blood from a medieval battle, and that 1964 marked when the last ghost finally found peace, taking the color with them to the afterlife. The Via Cave of Pitigliano are Etruscan roads carved directly into volcanic tuff, creating passages up to 20 meters deep, where ancient wheels wore grooves that remain visible after 2,500 years. These sunken roads weren't built, but excavated, removed from solid rock with bronze tools in an engineering feat that modern archaeologists struggle to comprehend. The Etruscans carved these passages for reasons that remain debated. Perhaps for defense, as armies couldn't deviate from the carved path, or for religious processions, as the high walls created sacred corridors between earth and sky. The tough walls have weathered into organic shapes, with ferns and moss creating vertical gardens in the perpetual twilight of these deep passages. Some sections are so narrow that two people cannot walk abreast, while others widen into chambers where travelers might have sheltered. The wheel ruts, worn into solid rock, preserve the exact axle width of Etruscan carts, a measurement that influenced Roman road design and ultimately the railroad gauges still used today. Walking these Vie cave means following paths that connected Etruscan cities when Rome was still a collection of mud huts, roads that survive while the civilization that created them vanished into historical shadow. Pantelleria Island sits precisely on the submarine boundary between the African and European tectonic plates, creating unique volcanic features found nowhere else in the Mediterranean. The island's Specchio di Venere, the mirror of Venus, fills a volcanic crater with water that maintains temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius at its edges, while the center remains cool, creating a natural spa where minerals precipitate into therapeutic mud. This lake sits 6 meters below sea level, fed by thermal springs that bubble through the crater floor, their mineral content so high that the water feels slippery, with dissolved silicates. The island's position between continents makes it a geological hybrid where African basalt meets European limestone, creating rocks that shouldn't exist together. Obsidian from Pantelleria, volcanic glass prized for toolmaking, has been found in archaeological sites across the Mediterranean, evidence that Neolithic peoples recognized this island's unique geology. The famous Pantelleria capers grow in volcanic soil that would kill most plants, thriving in conditions of high salinity and mineral content that produce flavors found nowhere else. Even the island's traditional damusi houses reflect its geology, with domed roofs designed to collect rare rainwater and thick lava stone walls that insulate against African heat. The Sibillini Mountains harbor Lake Pilato at 1,141 meters, the only place on Earth where Chirocephalus marchesoni survives, a crimson shrimp that has outlived the ice ages. This small lake, shaped like a pair of spectacles when full, provides the exact conditions these prehistoric crustaceans require: water that freezes solid in winter, then warms just enough in summer for reproduction, with mineral content that hasn't changed since the Pleistocene. The shrimp, barely a centimeter long, appear like drops of blood in the clear water, visible only during their brief summer breeding season when they turn the shallows pink. They survive winter as eggs in dried mud, waiting for snowmelt to resurrect their ancient life cycle. Local legend claims this lake is where Pontius Pilate's body was thrown after his death, his presence cursing the waters and creating the red color. The church banned access for centuries, believing the lake attracted necromancers seeking to commune with Pilate's spirit. Scientists discovered the shrimp only in 1954, finding that these creatures exist nowhere else, not even in similar lakes just kilometers away, making Lake Pilato an evolutionary island suspended in the Apennine peaks, preserving a species that watched glaciers advance and retreat. Torre del Filosofo on Mount Etna marks 2,920 meters, a refuge repeatedly built, destroyed, and rebuilt in humanity's stubborn dialogue with volcanic force. Constructed in 1811 and named Philosopher's Tower for the contemplation it inspired, this shelter has been buried by lava, blown apart by explosions, and rebuilt with obsessive determination. The current structure, or what remains of it after 2013's eruption, stands partially engulfed in black basalt that cooled around its walls like a frozen wave. The location offers views into Etna's summit craters when volcanic activity permits approach, a vantage point where Earth's interior becomes visible through veils of sulfur dioxide and steam. Each rebuilding used materials that previous eruptions provided: blocks of solid lava for walls, volcanic ash mixed into mortar, creating a structure built from the mountain's own substance. The refuge served as base camp for volcanologists studying eruptions, though several times researchers had to evacuate as lava approached, leaving instruments to be consumed by the mountain they measured. At this elevation, above most vegetation, the landscape resembles Mars more than Earth, with red oxidized cinders, yellow sulfur deposits, and black basalt, creating an abstract painting that changes with each eruption. The island of Sant'Antioco connects to Sardinia by a causeway that represents 3,000 years of continuous use, making it the Mediterranean's oldest functioning bridge. The Phoenicians built the first connection in the 8th century BCE, understanding that this island's strategic position controlled sea routes between Africa and Europe. Romans improved the Phoenician design with an elevated stone bridge that allowed water to flow beneath, preventing the silting that destroyed other ancient causeways. Medieval engineers added to the Roman structure, then Spanish and Italian builders reinforced it, creating an archaeological sandwich of engineering techniques visible in the causeway's cross-section. The modern road runs atop all these previous efforts, cars driving over stones placed by civilizations that no longer exist. Beneath the causeway, archaeologists have found Phoenician anchors, Roman coins, medieval pottery, and modern debris, a timeline of Mediterranean commerce compressed into marine sediment. The island itself reveals why this connection mattered so much. Natural harbors on both coasts, freshwater springs, and defensive positions that every Mediterranean power coveted. Today's connection, widened for modern traffic, still follows the exact route Phoenician traders established, a line across water that has outlasted empires. Grotta Gigante near Trieste contains a cavern vast enough to swallow St. Peter's Basilica, measuring 98.5 meters high, 167.6 meters long, and 76.3 meters wide. This enormous void exists because of the Tamavo River, which carved the initial cave before changing course, leaving behind a chamber that continued growing through limestone dissolution. The cave's size creates its own weather system, with temperature inversions and air currents that early explorers mistook for supernatural breathing. Scientific instruments suspended on cables from the ceiling measure tectonic movements, detecting earthquakes thousands of kilometers away, and tidal deformations of the Earth's crust. The cave formed in limestone laid down in the Cretaceous period, when this region was tropical seafloor, meaning visitors descend through millions of years of compressed sea life. Stalactites here grow at rates of 0.01 millimeters per year, making the largest formations over 500,000 years old. The cave's acoustic properties allow a whisper at one end to be heard clearly at the other, a phenomenon that led ancient peoples to believe gods lived in the depths. During World War I, the Austro-Hungarian army considered using the cave as an aircraft hangar, a plan abandoned when engineers realized the entrance modifications would likely collapse the entire structure. The Campi Flegrei supervolcano west of Naples spans 13 kilometers across a caldera that breathes with bradyseismic motion, rising and falling like a giant's chest. Between 1970 and 1984, the ground rose 3.5 meters, lifting the port of Pozzuoli and cracking buildings as magma shifted 3 kilometers below. This isn't a traditional volcano with a cone, but rather a collection of 24 craters spread across an area where the Earth's crust has thinned to just 3 kilometers. The entire region steams with fumaroles, bubbles with mud pools, and hisses with gas vents that make the land seem alive. At Solfatara crater, the ground sounds hollow when stamped upon, revealing vast cavities filled with superheated gas. The last major eruption in 1538 created Monte Nuovo, a 134-meter hill that appeared overnight, but the real danger lies in the potential for a super-eruption that could affect global climate. The Romans called this area Phlegraean Fields, the burning fields, and built elaborate bath complexes over thermal springs, unaware they were living inside one of Earth's most dangerous volcanic systems. Today, 500,000 people live within the caldera, their homes sitting above a magma chamber that could reshape geography in a single catastrophic moment. Lake Alleghe in the Dolomites exists because of 3 minutes of catastrophe on January 11, 1771, when Mount Piz collapsed without warning. The landslide, containing 48 million cubic meters of rock, dammed the Cordevole River instantly, creating a lake 2 kilometers long where 3 villages had stood moments before. The speed of the disaster left no time for escape. Church bells were ringing for morning mass when the mountain fell, and they say you can still hear them beneath the water on quiet mornings, though this is likely wind through the valley creating acoustic illusions. The lake formed so quickly that trees remained standing underwater for decades, their branches visible through the clear alpine water like the arms of drowning giants. The natural dam, composed of massive dolomite blocks, has proven remarkably stable, requiring only minor human reinforcement to prevent catastrophic failure. The lake's emerald color comes from glacial flour, microscopic rock particles suspended in water that scatter light in ways that make the lake appear illuminated from within. What makes Lake Alleghe particularly haunting is its clarity. On calm days, you can see foundations of the drowned villages through 10 meters of water, stone rectangles that mark where families lived before geology reformed their world in less time than it takes to boil water. The marble quarries of Carrara have been excavated continuously since Roman times, creating negative mountains where peaks once stood. Over 2 millennia, more than 5 million tons of marble have been removed, lowering some summits by 300 meters, transforming mountains into amphitheaters of white stone. The Romans discovered that Carrara marble possessed a translucence that made sculptures seem to breathe, a quality that drew Michelangelo here to personally select blocks for his masterpieces. The quarrying has created a landscape that appears snow-covered even in summer, with white debris cascades called ravinetti flowing down mountainsides like frozen avalanches. Modern extraction uses diamond wire saws that slice through marble like butter through bread, but the essential process remains unchanged, finding the perfect block hidden within the mountain's mass. The marble formed 200 million years ago from compressed sea creatures in conditions so specific that no other location produces stone of identical quality. Workers here speak of the marble's song, the particular tone each block makes when struck, revealing internal fractures or perfection. Some quarries have eaten so deeply into mountains that they've created caverns large enough to hold cathedrals. Inverse architecture, where the art was removed rather than built, leaving behind spaces that echo with absence. Molise region's Roccamandolfi village clings beneath a limestone pinnacle where hermit monks carved their cells directly into vertical cliff faces 1,000 years ago. These caves, accessible only by ropes or precarious carved handholds, provided isolation so complete that some hermits lived their entire lives without descending. The limestone here fractures in natural horizontal planes, creating ledges just wide enough for a human body to rest, which monks expanded into cells barely larger than coffins. Inside these aerial chambers, chisel marks remain visible on walls polished smooth by centuries of touching, and carved niches hold the memory of candles that provided the only light. The monks chose this particular cliff for its eastern orientation, allowing morning sun to warm the rock that would radiate heat through cold mountain nights. Water seepage through limestone created natural cisterns in some cells, providing hermits with drinking water that filtered through hundreds of meters of stone. The village below developed to support these aerial ascetics, providing food raised in baskets to monks who prayed suspended between earth and heaven. Today, the cells remain empty, though local shepherds report seeing lights in the cliff faces on certain holy nights, either tricks of moonlight on limestone or something more mysterious in these chambers where men sought to touch the infinite. The Gargano Peninsula was once an island called Insula Garganica, separated from mainland Italy by a shallow sea that covered what is now the Tavoliere Plain. Approximately 4,000 years ago, sea levels dropped and the Candelaro River began depositing sediment into the strait, gradually building a bridge of earth that connected island to continent. This transformation can be read in the rocks. Marine fossils appear in fields 30 kilometers from the current coast, and ancient beaches form terraces on hillsides that haven't seen waves since the Bronze Age. The peninsula retained its island character in isolation, developing unique species like the Gargano oak and endemic orchids that evolved during its separation. The limestone that forms the peninsula's foundation was laid down when this region was tropical seafloor, creating the white cliffs that earned Gargano the name Sperone d'Italia, the spur of Italy. Even today, the peninsula behaves more like an island, creating its own weather patterns as it projects into the Adriatic, forcing clouds to rise and drop rain that makes this the greenest region of Puglia. The Umbra forest at its heart preserves trees that are descendants of those that grew when Gargano truly was an island, a biological memory of geographic isolation. Lake Scano in Abruzzo mirrors the sky in the shape of a heart, formed when a landslide sealed the Sagittario River Valley like a love letter written in water and stone. The lake sits at 922 meters, surrounded by mountains that rise to 2,000 meters, creating a natural amphitheater that amplifies every sound across the water's surface. The landslide that created this lake occurred approximately 3,000 years ago, though local legend places it in Roman times, claiming an earthquake caused by pagan rituals brought down the mountainside. The heart shape is only visible from specific viewpoints above the lake, an accident of geology that has made Scano a pilgrimage site for lovers who throw coins into waters that have no outlet except seepage through the natural dam. The water maintains extraordinary clarity because the lake acts as a settling basin, trapping sediment while allowing clear water to percolate through. In winter, mist rises from the relatively warm water to meet cold mountain air, creating clouds that fill the valley and hide the lake completely, making it seem to disappear and reappear like a geographic magic trick. The deepest point reaches 89 meters, where water pressure and absence of light create conditions that preserve organic matter, including entire trees that sank centuries ago. The thermal pools of Bagni San Filippo hide in a Tuscan forest where limestone deposits have created frozen waterfalls of white calcium carbonate. These formations, called the Balena Bianca or white whale, have grown over millennia as hot springs deposit dissolved limestone in terraces and curtains that resemble carved marble. The water emerges at 52 degrees Celsius, rich in sulfur and calcium that precipitate immediately upon contact with air, building new rock at a rate visible over human lifetimes. Local families remember pools that didn't exist in their grandparents' time, while others have filled completely with deposits, creating a constantly evolving landscape. The formations glow almost phosphorescent in moonlight, and steam rising through forest canopy creates an otherworldly atmosphere that drew mystics and hermits for centuries. The calcium deposits have preserved leaves, insects, and small animals that fell into the pools, creating natural fossils that form in decades rather than millennia. Some pools are lined with deposits so pure they appear blue-white, while others contain iron that tints them cream or gold. The sound of water flowing over these formations creates a peculiar music as the irregular surfaces break the flow into countless tiny waterfalls that whisper rather than roar. Sicily's Valley of the Temples rests on a ridge of calcarenite that glows like honey in Mediterranean light, a stone that Greeks chose specifically for how it captures and holds the sun. This golden rock, formed from compressed marine sediments, possesses a unique crystalline structure that scatters light in warm wavelengths, making temples appear to generate their own illumination at sunset. The builders 2,500 years ago understood this property, orienting structures to maximize the effect during religious ceremonies timed to celestial events. The calcarenite weathers in a particular way, developing a patina that deepens the golden color while protecting the stone beneath, which explains why these temples have survived earthquakes and centuries, while similar structures elsewhere crumbled. The ridge itself was selected for sacred architecture because it rises above the coastal plain like a natural altar, visible from ships approaching the ancient port. The stone contains millions of tiny fossils that sparkle in direct sunlight, giving temple walls a subtle shimmer that must have seemed divine to ancient worshippers. Modern restoration has revealed that the Greeks enhanced this effect with transparent waxes that made the stone appear to glow from within. Though time and weather have long since removed these treatments, leaving only the natural luminescence of stone that remembers the sea. The island of Palmaria, near La Spezia, conceals marble so black it seems to absorb light, shot through with veins of gold pyrite that trace lightning patterns through darkness. This Portoro marble, found nowhere else, formed when volcanic intrusions heated limestone to extreme temperatures while introducing iron sulfides that created the gold veining. Medieval churches across Europe sought this stone exclusively for altars, believing its darkness made gold chalices and candlelight appear more brilliant by contrast. The quarries, abandoned since the 1980s, created caverns where seawater now enters at high tide, turning them into thundering sea caves. The marble was so valuable that quarry workers were sworn to secrecy about extraction locations, and maps showing the best veins were guarded like military secrets. The stone's unique properties extend beyond aesthetics. The pyrite veins conduct electricity, causing compass needles to deflect when passed over the marble's surface. Some blocks contain so much pyrite they spark when struck with steel, a phenomenon that convinced medieval stoneworkers the marble contained captured starlight. The difficulty of extraction, requiring specialized techniques to prevent the brittle stone from shattering along pyrite veins, made this marble worth more than silver by weight during the Renaissance. Lake Bolsena fills a volcanic caldera so vast that medieval pilgrims thought it was a sea. Its 13-kilometer width, created by an eruption 370,000 years ago that ejected 150 cubic kilometers of material across central Italy. This explosion, larger than any in recorded history, left a depression that gradually filled with rainwater and springs, creating Europe's largest volcanic lake. The caldera floor remains thermally active, with hot springs bubbling through the lake bed and occasional releases of carbon dioxide that can suffocate fish, creating mysterious mass deaths that medieval chroniclers attributed to divine wrath. Two islands rise from the depths, Bisantina and Martana, both remnants of subsequent volcanic activity that created secondary cones within the caldera. The lake water maintains remarkable purity because volcanic minerals cause pollutants to precipitate to the bottom, creating self-cleaning chemistry that keeps the water transparent to depths of 10 meters. Roman historians recorded that you could see coins on the bottom in waters deeper than temple columns were tall, a clarity that persists today. The surrounding slopes, formed from volcanic tuff and ash, have been carved into underground cities and tombs by Etruscans who recognized that this soft rock could preserve their dead for eternity. The Frasassi caves reveal chambers where time moves differently, stalactites growing 1 millimeter per decade in a patient accumulation that began 190,000 years ago. Discovered only in 1971, when cavers followed air currents through a narrow passage, these caverns had remained sealed since the Pleistocene, preserving formations of extraordinary delicacy. The largest chamber, the Abyss Ancona, could contain Milan Cathedral with room to spare, yet was carved by water no more forceful than a garden hose, working through limestone for millennia. The formations here display colors rarely seen in caves: pure white from calcium carbonate, red from iron oxide, black from manganese, and blue from copper deposits, creating a palette that seems painted rather than precipitated. Some stalactites are so thin they're translucent, allowing LED lights to shine through them like fiber optics. The caves maintain a constant temperature of 14 degrees Celsius and 100% humidity, conditions that allowed the formation of cave pearls, perfect spheres of calcium carbonate that form around sand grains in shallow pools. The Discovery Passage, barely wide enough for a human body, protected these chambers from temperature variations and contamination that would have destroyed the more delicate formations, preserving a masterpiece that darkness had kept secret. Strombolicchio Island rises from the Tyrrhenian Sea as the solidified throat of an ancient volcano, a black tower of basalt that represents the mountain's fossilized final breath. This volcanic plug formed 200,000 years ago when magma solidified in the volcano's conduit, creating a column of rock harder than the surrounding cone. Erosion by waves and weather removed the softer external slopes, leaving only this core standing 49 meters above the water like a natural lighthouse. The rock here cooled under pressure, creating a crystalline structure so dense that medieval fortress builders couldn't quarry it, their iron tools breaking against stone that rings like a bell when struck. A lighthouse now perches atop this natural tower, reached by a staircase carved into rock so hard that each step took workers weeks to cut. The basalt contains olivine crystals that sparkle green in sunlight, fragments of the Earth's mantle carried up from depths of 60 kilometers. Seabirds nest in cracks barely wide enough for their bodies, the only vegetation being a few hardy plants that survive on moisture condensed from sea spray. From Strombolicchio's summit, you can watch its parent volcano Stromboli erupting 2 kilometers away, the child observing its still active parent. The Piano Grande Plateau spreads beneath Castelluccio like an ancient seabed raised to mountain height, 15 square kilometers of fertility suspended at 1,070 meters. This vast plain was once a Pleistocene lake, trapped between mountains until natural drainage slowly emptied it 100,000 years ago, leaving behind sediments that created some of Italy's most fertile soil at an elevation where most plants struggle. The flatness is so perfect that winter snow creates an unbroken white canvas stretching to the horizon, while summer transforms it into the fioritura flower display. The plateau acts as a natural amphitheater for weather, with clouds flowing across it like aerial rivers, and temperature inversions that create seas of fog with mountain peaks emerging like islands. Shepherds have grazed flocks here for millennia, following patterns unchanged since the Bronze Age, their paths worn into the earth, creating patterns visible from surrounding peaks. The soil depth reaches 40 meters in places, accumulated from countless cycles of lake filling and drying, creating an agricultural anomaly where lentils grow at elevations typically reserved for alpine grass. Strange acoustic properties allow sounds to travel extraordinary distances across the plain, with shepherd whistles audible kilometers away, as if the ancient lakebed remembers how to carry sound across water. Baya's underwater archaeological park preserves a Roman Las Vegas drowned by volcanic breath, where emperors' villas and thermal baths lie 5 meters beneath the Bay of Naples. Bradyseism, the slow breathing of the Campi Flegrei volcanic system, has lowered this coastline 10 meters since Roman times, submerging a city that Seneca condemned as a vortex of luxury. Glass-bottom boats reveal mosaic floors depicting myths and geometric patterns perfectly preserved by marine sediment that protected them from erosion. Statues still stand in their niches, now home to octopi and moray eels that swim through rooms where Nero and Caligula held orgies. The submersion was gradual enough that inhabitants had time to remove valuables, leaving behind only what was too heavy or worthless to save, creating an underwater museum of Roman daily life. The thermal springs that made Baia famous still bubble through the seafloor, creating shimmering columns of warm water where tropical fish species survive in the otherwise temperate bay. Divers can swim through doorways and along streets following the same routes Roman citizens walked. Though now schools of fish replace human crowds, the site continues sinking approximately 2 centimeters per year, meaning what is visible today will eventually descend beyond recreational diving depths. The Zingaro Nature Reserve in Sicily protects 7 kilometers of coastline that exists only because one woman lay down in front of bulldozers in 1976. This stretch between Scopello and San Vito lo Capo was scheduled for a coastal highway until environmental protesters prevented construction, preserving limestone cliffs where Bonelli's eagles nest above hidden coves accessible only by footpaths. The limestone here formed in tropical seas 200 million years ago, now sculpted by waves into sea caves and natural arches where Mediterranean monk seals once raised their pups. The reserve protects 40 species of birds, 700 plant species, and the last Sicilian populations of several endemic plants that grow nowhere else on Earth. Each cove contains different colored pebbles, sorted by millennia of wave action: white marble at Cala Bianca, black basalt at Cala Nera, red jasper at Cala Rosa. Underwater springs emerge in several bays, creating haloclines where fresh and salt water meet in shimmering curtains visible to swimmers. The absence of roads means the night sky remains unpolluted by artificial light, creating one of Europe's darkest coastlines where the Milky Way reflects on calm seas, doubling the stars. Mount Amiata in Tuscany conceals mercury deposits that glimmer like quicksilver tears in volcanic rock, mines that supplied the Roman Empire with the liquid metal they called argentum vivum, living silver. The cinnabar ore, mercury sulfide that appears as brilliant red crystals, formed when volcanic activity pushed mercury vapors through fractures in the rock where they condensed and crystallized. Miners descended 400 meters through galleries following veins of cinnabar, working in conditions where mercury vapor posed constant danger. The Romans used mercury for everything from medicine to gold extraction, not understanding they were slowly poisoning themselves with each application. The mines created a landscape of industrial archaeology, with furnaces for roasting cinnabar and condensation chambers, where mercury was collected drop by drop. Some galleries intersect natural caves where mercury occurs in its native form, pooled in rock cavities like supernatural mirrors that never tarnish. The volcanic heat that created these deposits continues, with thermal springs emerging around the mountain's base, their waters carrying trace amounts of mercury that makes them shimmer with an oily iridescence. The mountain itself is an extinct volcano, its last eruption 200,000 years ago, but the mercury deposits suggest magma chambers still exist deep below. The island of Capraia, formed from two distinct volcanic episodes separated by 2 million years, creating a geological timeline visible in cliff faces that rise 400 meters from the sea. The first eruption 9 million years ago produced gray andesite lava, while the second 7 million years ago created red basalt flows, the two rock types meeting in a clear line that circles the island like a geological equator. This dual nature extends beyond rocks. The vegetation on gray volcanic soil differs from that on red, creating two distinct ecological zones on one small island. Erosion has carved the softer red rock more quickly, creating a landscape where gray volcanic peaks tower over red valleys in a natural architecture of contrasting colors. The island's position, closer to Corsica than Italy, made it a natural prison, isolated by currents that can turn the surrounding sea into a whirlpool of conflicting waters. Fresh water springs emerge where the two rock types meet, the different permeabilities creating natural aquifers that have allowed human habitation since Neolithic times. The volcanic soil's fertility supports unique plant communities, including the Capraia violet, that grows only in cracks where red and gray rocks meet. Lake Vico occupies a caldera where nature created a perfect circle, then placed a mountain in its center, Monte Venere, rising from the lake like an island that forgot the sea. The original volcanic cone collapsed 138,000 years ago after emptying its magma chamber in an eruption that scattered ash across central Italy. The resulting depression filled with rainwater, but subsequent volcanic activity created Monte Venere, a secondary cone that rose from the caldera floor but never breached the surface, remaining as an island mountain surrounded by its own moat. The lake's circular shape is so perfect that Renaissance architects used it as a model for ideal city planning, though no city was ever built here. The water depth reaches 50 meters, deep enough that the bottom waters never mix with the surface, creating two distinct layers with different temperatures and oxygen levels. The surrounding caldera walls are covered with beech forests that shouldn't exist at this elevation, but the bowl shape traps humid air that creates a microclimate resembling mountains 500 meters higher. Romans considered the lake sacred to Venus, claiming the goddess bathed here, which explains Monte Venere's name and the tradition of floating flower wreaths on the water during summer solstice. The Alcantara Gorge in Sicily displays nature's ability to create geometric perfection from chaos, where lava met water to form basalt columns that rival any human architecture. When the Alcantara River encountered a lava flow from Mount Etna thousands of years ago, the rapid cooling created hexagonal columns up to 50 meters high, their surfaces so smooth they appear polished. The river has since carved through these columns, creating a gorge where water flows between walls that look like enormous pipe organs made of stone. Each column represents a perfect solution to the physics of cooling, the hexagonal shape allowing uniform contraction with minimal cracking. The regularity is so precise that early visitors thought giants had built a causeway here similar to Ireland's Giant's Causeway, formed by the same process. The basalt's dark gray color makes the turquoise water appear almost fluorescent by contrast, especially where sunlight penetrates to the narrow gorge floor. In some sections, the river has carved pools where the hexagonal pattern continues underwater, creating natural hot tubs lined with geometric stone. The acoustic properties of the columnar basalt make the gorge echo with the sound of flowing water, amplified and reflected until it becomes a constant music. Alberobello's landscape is painted in terra rossa, iron-rich soil that colors the fields between white trully houses like an artist's deliberate contrast. This red earth formed over millions of years as limestone weathered in the presence of iron oxides, creating soil that clings to everything it touches with russet permanence. The terra rossa occurs in pockets where limestone bedrock created natural bowls that trapped weathering products, concentrating iron until the soil appears to glow in certain lights. Farmers learned that this red soil, despite its dramatic appearance, was fertile only with careful management, requiring the addition of organic matter to break up its clay structure. The contrast between white limestone walls, gray trully cones, and red earth creates a tricolor landscape that changes intensity with moisture, brilliant after rain, dusty pink in drought. The soil's iron content is so high that local pottery made from terra rossa fires to deep terracotta without added colorants. Ancient olive trees grow from this red earth, their silver-green leaves adding another color to the palette, while grapevines produce wines with a distinctive mineral note that sommeliers attribute to iron absorbed from the soil. The Aeolian island of Volcano is a natural laboratory where Earth demonstrates chemistry through colored crystals and poison gases. Fumaroles here deposit pure sulfur that crystallizes into yellow diamonds around vents reaching 600 degrees Celsius, creating mineral gardens that grow and vanish with changes in volcanic activity. The sulfur forms through a process of sublimation, passing directly from gas to solid, skipping the liquid phase entirely, which creates crystals of exceptional purity and geometric perfection. Different temperatures produce different minerals: yellow sulfur at the hottest vents, white aluminum sulfates where temperatures drop below 400 degrees, red iron sulfates in cooler zones. The fumarole field changes constantly, with new vents opening and old ones sealing, creating an ever-shifting landscape of chemical deposition. The gases are toxic enough to kill vegetation in wide circles around active vents, creating dead zones that look like clearings burned by invisible fire. Medieval alchemists came here seeking the philosopher's stone, believing that any place where earth transformed minerals so readily must hold secrets of transmutation. Today's visitors mud bathe in pools heated by fumaroles, the sulfurous mud said to cure skin ailments, though the smell of hydrogen sulfide clings to bathers for days afterward. Lake Nemi in the Alban Hills maintains a circular perfection that made ancients call it Diana's mirror, reflecting sky and clouds in waters that fill a volcanic crater. The lake's almost perfect round shape, 1.67 kilometers in diameter, results from a volcanic explosion that created a symmetrical crater, later sealed by lava flows that made it watertight. The name mirror came not just from the shape, but from the lake's unusual stillness, protected by high crater walls from winds that might disturb its surface. Roman emperors built floating palaces here, enormous ships that were essentially buildings on barges, recovered in the 1930s, then destroyed in World War II, leaving only models to show their impossible grandeur. The lake has no surface outlet, maintaining its level through underground seepage and evaporation, creating a closed system that concentrates minerals and creates unique water chemistry. The surrounding crater walls are covered with woods sacred to Diana, where her temple once stood, its foundations still visible among trees that may be descendants of the sacred grove. Local strawberries grown on the volcanic slopes are famous throughout Italy for their intensity, the volcanic soil and lake microclimate creating fruit that tastes concentrated, as if the berries had absorbed the essence of this perfect circular world. Riprova F, continuing the sleep-inducing geography documentary, maintain the same contemplative voice. Continue with facts, 6180 from the outline. For each fact should be 150-250 words, never less than 150, can extend to 250 for complex topics. Start directly with the location phenomenon. Include surprising details. Focus on wonder and imagery rather than precise data. Keep the voice contemplative and soothing throughout. Flow naturally to next fact when connections arise. No numbering or headers. Flow naturally between facts when possible. No numbering or headers. Never repeat locations already covered. Each fact must be 150-250 words. Minimum 150 words. Never less than 150 words. If you write less than 150 words per fact, you have failed. Count the words if necessary. Mapped out geographical facts and narrative flow for documentary. The user wants me to continue with facts 6180 from the outline. Let me check which locations I need to cover. The Solfatara crater near Pozzuoli, Sardinia's Costa Smeralda granite, the ghost town of Creco in Basilicata, Lake Ladro in Trentino, the island of Gianutri, Val Grande in Piedmont, the Riace Marina offshore, brief, Mount Circeo, the Pontine Islands, Lake Bracciano, the Tremiti Islands, Friuli's Timavo River, the island of Ustica Lake Albano, the Aeolian island of Filicudi Policoros coastal forests, brief, the Cancilio Forest Plateau, Sicily's Pantalica Necropolis, the island of Giglio Lake Trasimeno. I need to make sure each fact is 150-250 words, maintaining the contemplative, sleep-inducing tone. I should flow naturally between facts when possible. The Solfatara crater near Pozzuoli releases 2,500 tons of carbon dioxide and 3,300 tons of water vapor daily through fumaroles that transform solid ground into a bubbling, hissing landscape of mud and steam. This shallow volcanic crater, formed 4,000 years ago, serves as Earth's safety valve, releasing pressure from the Campi Flegrei system through thousands of small vents rather than one catastrophic explosion. The ground here sounds hollow when walked upon, resonating like a drum, because chambers of superheated gas create voids beneath the surface. Romans called this the Forum Volcani, believing the god of fire held court here, and built thermal baths around the edges where they could harness the heat while avoiding the toxic center. The mud pools bubble with the consistency of thick porridge, gray-white slurry that maintains temperatures of 140 degrees Celsius, occasionally spurting geysers of boiling mud that build small cones around active vents. Sulfur crystallizes in yellow-green deposits around fumarole edges, while aluminum sulfates paint other areas white, creating a palette that seems borrowed from another planet. The entire crater floor remains barren of vegetation, except for rare thermophilic bacteria that thrive in conditions that would kill almost any other life form, painting rocks orange and green with their microscopic colonies. Sardinia's Costa Smeralda displays granite sculptures that nature carved over 300 million years. Pink-gray boulders weathered into forms so smooth they appear melted rather than eroded. This granite formed deep in the Earth's crust during the Hercynian orogeny, when continents collided and mountains rose that have long since disappeared. What remains are these plutonic cores, exposed by erosion and shaped by a process called exfoliation, where the rock peels away in curved sheets like an infinite onion. The granite weathers into fantastic shapes: elephants, bears, mushrooms, and abstract forms that change appearance with shifting light and viewing angle. Between these formations, wind and water have carved tophony, honeycomb patterns of small caves that riddle the rock faces, each cavity creating its own microclimate where rare plants grow. The pink color comes from orthoclase feldspar crystals that catch sunlight, making the rocks glow at dawn and sunset, as if lit from within. Some boulders balance impossibly on tiny contact points, tons of stone resting on areas no larger than a dinner plate, defying gravity through perfect weight distribution. The spaces between rocks collect rainwater in natural basins called namas, temporary pools that support entire ecosystems that appear and vanish with the rains. The ghost town of Krakow in Basilicata stands on a hill of Pliocene clay that expands and contracts like a living thing, breathing with moisture until the medieval town built upon it could no longer stand. The clay, deposited when this region was seafloor, has a peculiar property. It swells when wet and shrinks when dry, creating constant movement that no foundation can withstand. The abandonment came gradually, then suddenly. For centuries, residents repaired cracks and reinforced walls, but a landslide in 1963 made the situation untenable, forcing the evacuation of 1,800 residents who left behind a town that appears frozen in time. The buildings remain standing, but slowly lean at increasingly impossible angles, like a town painted by an expressionist artist who cared nothing for vertical lines. The clay continues its expansion and contraction, opening new cracks with each rain, closing others during drought, making the town reshape itself seasonally. From a distance, Krakow appears intact, its medieval tower and church still crowning the hilltop. But closer inspection reveals empty windows and doors opening onto nothing, streets that end in cliff edges where houses have already fallen. The silence is absolute, except for wind through empty buildings and the occasional crash of masonry, finally succumbing to the clay's relentless movement. Lake Ladro in Trentino kept a Bronze Age secret beneath its waters until drought in 1929 revealed 10,000 wooden poles standing like a submerged forest. These poles, the remains of stilt houses built around 2200 BCE, had been preserved perfectly in the lake's oxygen-poor sediments, wood that should have rotted millennia ago still showing axe marks from bronze tools. The settlement thrived for 600 years on platforms raised above the water, connected by wooden walkways that created a village floating above its own reflection. The inhabitants chose this aquatic architecture not from necessity, but preference, as dry land was available nearby. Living over water provided natural cooling, protection from wild animals, and easy waste disposal, advantages that outweighed the constant maintenance required. Archaeological diving has recovered thousands of artifacts: bronze pins, ceramic vessels, wooden tools, and even food remains that reveal a diet of wheat, barley, hazelnuts, and wild game. The lake level has fluctuated many times since the Bronze Age, alternately drowning and exposing the site, each submersion adding another layer of preservative sediment. Today, reconstructed stilt houses on the shore show visitors how these ancient lake dwellers lived, though the original settlement remains below, its wooden bones still standing in formation. The island of Gianutri resembles a crescent moon carved from limestone and dolomite, two curved ridges connected by an isthmus so narrow that storms sometimes wash completely over it. From above, the island's shape appears deliberately designed, as if nature decided to create the perfect symbol of a waxing moon and set it floating in the Tyrrhenian Sea. The two ridges formed from different geological processes. The northern ridge is older limestone, while the southern is younger dolomite, their meeting creating a natural harbor protected from all but eastern storms. Roman patricians recognized this perfect shelter, building villas whose ruins still crown both ridges, their mosaic floors depicting dolphins and sea monsters that swimmers once walked upon. The isthmus, only 500 meters wide, creates unusual wave patterns as swells from different directions meet and interfere, sometimes canceling each other to create patches of glassy calm surrounded by choppy seas. No freshwater springs exist on Genutri, so Romans built elaborate cistern systems that collected rainwater, their engineering still visible in channels carved into bedrock that direct every drop towards storage. The island's isolation preserved unique plant communities, including a variety of rosemary that grows nowhere else, its essential oils concentrated by constant salt spray and drought. Val Grande in Piedmont contains Italy's largest wilderness area, 150 square kilometers of forest where no roads penetrate and no permanent inhabitants have lived since 1944. This valley earned its solitude through tragedy. Partisan warfare during World War II led to the evacuation of all settlements, and when peace came, no one returned to rebuild among painful memories. Nature reclaimed the abandoned villages with stunning speed. Roofs collapsed under snow, walls crumbled as tree roots pried apart stones, and within decades, forest had swallowed entire communities. The only traces are stone foundations emerging from leaf litter and terraced hillsides slowly returning to natural slopes. Wildlife that had been absent for centuries returned: wolves, golden eagles, and possibly lynx, though the latter remains unconfirmed, more ghost than certainty. The absence of human activity for 80 years has created conditions that exist nowhere else in Italy, a laboratory for understanding how nature repairs human damage when given complete freedom. Hikers who enter Val Grande must be entirely self-sufficient, following paths that deteriorate more each year as bridges rot and landslides erase trails. The silence here is profound, broken only by wind, through trees, and the occasional cry of animals that have forgotten to fear humans. The waters off Riache Marina held secret cargo for 2,500 years. Two ancient Greek bronze warriors discovered in 1972 at just 8 meters depth. These statues, likely thrown overboard during a storm, came to rest on sandy seafloor where sediment slowly buried them, creating anaerobic conditions that preserved bronze that should have corroded to nothing. The warriors stood for millennia in their underwater tomb, salt replacing the tin in their bronze alloy in a process that actually strengthened the metal. Discovered by a snorkeler who saw what he thought was a human arm protruding from sand, the statues emerged bearing faces so detailed that individual eyelashes remain visible, expressions so lifelike they seem about to speak. The seafloor here holds other secrets, certainly, as Roman and Greek ships regularly foundered along this coast, their cargoes scattered across Neptune's warehouse. Each storm shifts sand to reveal new artifacts: amphora, anchors, lead ingots, then covers them again, a constantly changing archaeological landscape. The bronzes now stand in Reggio Calabria's museum, but their empty pedestals remain on the seafloor, rectangular depressions in sand that mark where art waded through centuries for resurrection. Mount Circeo was an island when seas were higher, and ancient beaches carved into its limestone flanks remain visible as terraces 100 meters above current sea level. These fossil beaches preserve shells and rounded pebbles at elevations where only birds now venture, evidence of oceans that rose and fell through ice ages and interglacials. The mountain's island past explains its biological uniqueness. Plants and animals isolated here evolved differently than mainland populations, creating endemic species that persist despite Circeo's reconnection to the continent. Neanderthals lived in caves here when it truly was an island, leaving bones and tools in chambers that once opened onto beaches but now overlook agricultural plains. The limestone preserves their footprints in calcified mud, steps taken 50,000 years ago when the geography was unrecognizable. From Circeo's summit, you can trace ancient shorelines across the Pontine Plain, parallel lines of slightly elevated ground that mark where waves once broke. The mountain itself is a classic horst, a block of crust thrust upward while surrounding land subsided, creating vertical cliffs on the seaward side that rise directly from the water like walls. These cliffs create their own weather, forcing sea winds upward where they cool and drop moisture, making Circeo's summit a cloud forest in a region that rarely sees rain. The Pontine Islands emerged from two different geological processes, separated by millions of years and hundreds of kilometers of crustal movement. Ponza and its neighbors formed from volcanic activity 1 million years ago, their rocks young and fireborn, while Zanone consists of metamorphic rock 200 million years old, a fragment of continental crust somehow stranded among volcanic islands. This impossible neighbor shouldn't exist here, yet it does, its ancient schists and quartzites standing among volcanic tuff and obsidian like a grandfather among children. The contrast extends beyond rocks. Vegetation on Zanone differs completely from the volcanic islands, supporting plant communities that belong on mainland mountains rather than Mediterranean islands. The geological mystery deepens when you realize Zanone's rocks match formations in the Alps, suggesting this island traveled here through tectonic processes still not fully understood. Between these mismatched islands, the seafloor drops to abyssal depths immediately, no continental shelf cushioning the transition from land to deep ocean. This geographic anomaly creates upwellings that bring deep, nutrient-rich water to the surface, supporting marine ecosystems more typical of open ocean than coastal waters. Roman emperors exiled political enemies here, perhaps understanding that these impossible islands, formed from incompatible processes, were perfect prisons for impossible situations. Lake Bracciano fills a volcanic depression that last erupted 40,000 years ago. Its waters now so pure, they supply Rome through an aqueduct built by Pope Paul V in 1612. The lake occupies a complex caldera formed by multiple eruption centers, creating a scalloped shoreline where each bay represents a different volcanic vent. The depth reaches 165 meters in the northern basin, where water remains cold year-round, creating thermal stratification that prevents complete mixing and maintains different ecosystems at various depths. The volcanic origin enriches the water with minerals that support unusual clarity, allowing visibility to 8 meters depth, remarkable for a lake this size. No rivers feed Bracciano, only underground springs that emerge through the caldera floor, their flow so consistent that the lake level barely varies despite supplying millions of Romans with drinking water. The aqueduct follows almost exactly the route of an ancient Roman channel, engineers separated by 1,500 years, reaching identical conclusions about the best path for water to flow. Castle Orsini Odescalchi perches on the crater rim, its foundations incorporating volcanic rocks that cooled in the same eruption that created the lake, a fortress built from the mountain's own bones. The Tremiti Islands contain San Nicola's Abbey built on Roman foundations that rest on Iron Age settlements, creating an archaeological layer cake 15 meters above the Adriatic. Each civilization chose this identical spot for the same reason: a natural acropolis of limestone that commands views in every direction while being defensible from only one approach. The limestone formed from Cretaceous sea deposits, compressed shells, and marine organisms, creating rock that fractures into natural building blocks. Medieval monks simply had to quarry their monastery from the cliff it stands on, the abbey and island becoming indistinguishable. Beneath the abbey, Roman cisterns still hold water, carved from solid rock in bottle shapes that narrow at the top to minimize evaporation. Below these, Iron Age chambers served unknown purposes, their walls bearing carved symbols that predate written language. The islands served as a prison through various eras, from Roman political exiles to Mussolini's enemies, the isolation that made them sacred to monks, making them perfect for containing undesirables. Even the name Tremiti, meaning tremors, speaks to their volcanic origin, though the trembling now comes only from waves that crash against limestone cliffs with force that shakes the ground. Friuli's Timavo River performs a vanishing act worthy of mythology, disappearing underground near San Giovanni and flowing through karst caverns for 38 kilometers before emerging in 7 springs near the Adriatic. This isn't gradual seepage, but complete submersion, the entire river plunging into a cave system and navigating through limestone darkness where no human has fully mapped its course. The underground journey takes the water through chambers large enough to hold cathedrals and passages so narrow that water pressure forces it through at tremendous speed. Dye tests show the water takes between 3 and 170 hours to complete its subterranean journey, depending on rainfall and water levels, suggesting multiple routes through the karst maze. Where it emerges, the 7 springs burst from the ground with such force that ancient Romans built a temple here to the river god, believing divine power drove the water upward. The springs maintain a constant temperature of 11 degrees Celsius regardless of season, and their combined flow creates a river that seems born fully formed from solid rock. Between disappearance and re-emergence, the Timavo exists in an unmappable realm, a river that flows through geological imagination, connecting surface geography to the hidden architecture of dissolved limestone. The island of Ustica formed entirely from submarine volcanic eruptions, creating a black basalt pyramid that rises from abyssal depths to break the Mediterranean's surface. Every rock on Ustica came from underwater lava flows that cooled instantly in seawater, creating pillow basalts with glossy surfaces that still appear wet. The submarine origin is evident everywhere, in rounded lava bombs that solidified while flying through water, in volcanic glass that forms only under rapid cooling, in gas cavities that compressed under water pressure into shapes impossible in aerial eruptions. These black cliffs, riddled with sea caves, once sheltered Mediterranean monk seals, now extinct here but remembered in place names and fishers' tales. The volcanic soil, rich in minerals but poor in organic matter, supports unique plant communities adapted to near-desert conditions despite being surrounded by water. Ancient peoples carved tombs directly into the volcanic rock, creating necropoli that faced the sea, possibly believing the black rock provided passage to the underworld. The island's name derives from ustum, meaning burnt, though Ustica never burned in air, only in water. Its entire mass formed in the paradox of fire beneath the sea. Lake Albano plunges 170 meters into a volcanic crater where Roman engineering from 398 BCE still functions perfectly, controlling water levels through a tunnel that has operated continuously for 2,400 years. The Romans built this drainage tunnel after an oracle declared they would never conquer Veii, while Albano's waters remained high, a prophecy that proved correct once the tunnel was completed. The engineering required is astounding. A channel 1,200 meters long cut through solid volcanic rock with Bronze Age tools, maintaining a precise gradient that allows water to flow without erosion or silting. The lake itself formed from multiple overlapping craters that created a complex basin with underwater ridges and valleys mapped only recently using sonar. These surveys revealed Roman artifacts at depths suggesting the lake level has varied dramatically, with anchors found 20 meters below current waterline and roads discovered during drought years. The volcanic gases that created the crater still seep through the lake floor occasionally, creating fish kills that Romans interpreted as omens, but science recognizes as carbon dioxide releases. The surrounding crater walls rise so steeply that microclimates exist at different elevations, with subtropical plants at water level and alpine species on the rim, a complete ecosystem contained in a volcanic bowl. The Aeolian island of Filicudi preserves a prehistoric village at Capo Graziano, where obsidian was currency and volcanic glass meant wealth. Built 5,000 years ago when Mediterranean trade routes were establishing, this settlement controlled obsidian sources that provided the ancient world's sharpest cutting tools before metal. The village sits on terraces carved from volcanic rock, positioned to watch for trading ships while remaining invisible from the sea, a balance between commerce and security. Obsidian from Filicudi has been found in archaeological sites from Spain to Turkey, black glass that traveled further than the people who traded it. The volcanic glass forms here with unusual purity, creating blades sharper than modern surgical steel when properly knapped. The prehistoric inhabitants understood this value, building defensive walls around obsidian outcrops and workshops where master knappers turned raw glass into standardized blade cores for export. Today, obsidian fragments litter certain beaches, black glass pebbles that ring like bells when waves roll them together. The village was abandoned when bronze replaced obsidian, the island's economy collapsing as suddenly as any modern resource bust, leaving stone houses and obsidian workshops to slowly merge back into the volcanic rock from which they were carved. Policoro's coastal forests preserve the last Italian habitat for the European pond turtle, a remnant ecosystem where the Cinni River creates brackish lagoons behind Mediterranean dunes. These wetlands exist in delicate balance between fresh and salt water, with seasonal variations that create constantly changing salinity gradients, supporting unique biological communities. The pond turtles require exactly these conditions: fresh water for drinking, brackish water for feeding, and sandy banks above flood level for nesting. Ancient Greeks founded Heraclea here, precisely because these wetlands provided fish, game, and protection from invaders who couldn't navigate the maze of channels and marshes. The forest consists primarily of Aleppo pines that tolerate salt spray, their resin once harvested for ship caulking, creating trees scarred by centuries of tapping. Beneath the pines, rare orchids grow in sandy soil, enriched by centuries of organic matter, some species found nowhere else in Italy. The habitat survives only through constant human intervention, as upstream dams and agricultural drainage would otherwise destroy the delicate hydrological balance. Each spring, pond turtles that may be 50 years old emerge to lay eggs in sand their ancestors have used since before Rome existed. The Cancelio Forest Plateau sits in a vast karst depression at 1,000 meters where cold air pools to create temperature inversions that freeze valley floors while peaks remain warm. This meteorological paradox creates a ghost forest phenomenon where frost forms at ground level on clear nights even in summer, while trees at slightly higher elevations experience Mediterranean warmth. The depression, called a polgia, formed when limestone dissolved along specific geological structures, creating a flat-bottomed bowl surrounded by peaks. The temperature inversions are so reliable that plants have evolved to match them, with Arctic species growing in frost pockets, while warmth-loving plants thrive on slopes just meters away. During inversions, the forest appears to smoke as warm air rises through cold layers, creating pillars of mist that gave rise to legends of forest spirits. The plateau provided Venice with timber for ships, with specific areas designated for masts, others for hulls, a forest managed like a wooden mine. Ancient coppiced beaches still grow in geometric patterns, their multiple trunks revealing management strategies abandoned centuries ago. The silence here is extraordinary, the bowl shape and dense forest absorbing sound so completely that foresters claim you can hear sap rising through trees on quiet spring mornings. Sicily's Pantalica necropolis contains 5,000 tombs carved into limestone canyon walls along the Anapo River, creating a vertical cemetery used continuously from 1270 to 650 BCE. These tombs, carved with bronze tools into cliff faces, required extraordinary effort. Workers suspended on ropes, chiseling chambers into solid rock, many tombs accessible only by climbing or rope descent. The placement wasn't random, but followed natural limestone stratification, with higher status burials in harder rock layers that required more effort to excavate. Each tomb consists of a small chamber, rarely larger than necessary for contracted burial position, with grooves showing where wooden doors once sealed the dead inside. The sheer number creates a honeycomb effect, cliff faces perforated with dark openings that Byzantine hermits later converted into churches and cells. The Anapo River below has carved pools and waterfalls through the limestone, creating an acoustic environment where water sounds echo off tomb-riddled cliffs. The limestone here contains chert nodules that prehistoric inhabitants napped into tools, workshop debris still visible on terraces between tomb levels. Why this specific location was chosen remains mysterious, though the dramatic geography, with its vertical walls and hidden valley, must have seemed appropriate for a city of the dead suspended between earth and sky. The island of Giglio consists almost entirely of granite that crystallized 5 million years ago from magma that cooled slowly enough to form crystals visible to the naked eye. This granite contains unusual amounts of iron, which Romans mined for weapons, following veins of magnetite that create compass anomalies still confusing navigation today. The mining left caverns that flood at high tide, creating booming sounds as waves compress air in narrowing passages, a phenomenon locals call the island's breathing. The granite weathers into distinctive forms, rounded boulders stacked like giants' toys, tafoni holes that whistle in strong winds, and namas, rock pools, that support fairy shrimp populations that appear only after rain. The iron content colors the granite pink to rust red, depending on oxidation, with some cliffs appearing painted with vertical stripes where water seepage creates patterns of chemical weathering. Roman slag heaps contain enough residual iron that plants growing on them show signs of metal toxicity, creating botanical indicators of ancient industry. The island's name may derive from the Greek word for goat, though another theory links it to the lily, giglio in Italian, as the granite's pale color supposedly resembled lily petals to ancient sailors approaching from the sea. Lake Trasimeno has no natural outlet, losing water only through evaporation and a channel built in 1420 to prevent flooding that had plagued surrounding plains for millennia. This closed system creates unusual limnological conditions where water chemistry depends entirely on rainfall and evaporation balance, with no rivers to flush accumulated minerals and nutrients. The lake acts like an enormous rain gauge, its level recording wet and dry years with precision that has allowed climatologists to reconstruct weather patterns back to medieval times using monastery records of lake height. Without the artificial outlet, Trasimeno would naturally fluctuate between marsh and deep lake, a cycle that created rich sediments now farmed, but historically made settlement impossible. The 1420 channel required sophisticated engineering to function properly, with sluice gates that prevent backflow during Tiber floods, while allowing controlled drainage when Trasimeno rises. The lake's isolation from river systems created unique fish populations, including a tench variety found nowhere else, adapted to the lake's particular chemistry. Roman generals trained naval forces here, the lake large enough for maneuvers, but calm enough for inexperienced sailors, its waters witnessing practice battles that prepared fleets for Mediterranean conquest. Today's lake level is managed to centimeter precision, a mathematical balance between agriculture, ecology, and flood prevention. The Gola del Furlo preserves scratch marks from brown bears that vanished from central Italy in 1700, claw marks etched into limestone at heights that reveal ancient cave entrances now sealed or collapsed. These scratches, some reaching 3 meters above current ground level, indicate where bears sharpened claws and marked territory, their depth suggesting repeated use over generations. The limestone here is soft enough to preserve such marks, yet hard enough to protect them from weathering, creating an archive of extinct wildlife behavior written in stone. Some scratches overlap, creating palimpsests where multiple bears use the same marking spots across decades or centuries. The height of certain marks suggests bears standing on hind legs, reaching upward in displays of size and strength that no human witnessed. Cave entrances that bears used for winter dens are still visible as depressions in the cliff face, though most are now inaccessible, their interiors collapsed or filled with centuries of sediment. Local shepherds know these marks well, passing down stories of the last bears, though the stories have grown with telling until the bears have become dragons or monsters. The scratches remain as signatures of absence, proof that this landscape once supported megafauna that seemed eternal until they weren't. Mount Subasio's pink limestone formed from microscopic shells in Jurassic seas, compressed into stone that now provides the rose-colored blocks that give Assisi its distinctive glow at dawn and sunset. This limestone, called Scaglia Rossa, contains billions of foraminifera, single-celled organisms whose calcium carbonate shells accumulated on the seafloor 150 million years ago. Iron oxide traces within the stone create the pink coloration, varying from pale rose to deep salmon depending on iron concentration and oxidation state. The quarries on Subasio's slopes have been worked since Etruscan times, each era leaving its mark in extraction techniques visible in the quarry walls. Medieval builders discovered that this particular limestone hardens with exposure to air, becoming more durable over centuries, which explains why Assisi's oldest buildings often appear newer than recent constructions. The stone's porosity allows it to breathe, absorbing and releasing moisture in ways that regulate humidity inside buildings, creating natural climate control that modern materials struggle to replicate. When rain falls on this pink stone, it temporarily deepens to burgundy, making whole towns blush with color before drying back to rose. The limestone also contains chert nodules that sparkle in sunlight, giving buildings a subtle glitter that changes with viewing angle. The island of Asinara maintained perfect isolation as a prison colony until 1997, inadvertently preserving a population of albino donkeys found nowhere else on Earth. These white donkeys, descendants of animals imported from Egypt in the 1800s, evolved their lack of pigmentation through genetic isolation on an island where predators were absent and white coloration carried no disadvantage. The donkeys roam free across Mediterranean machia, their white forms moving like ghosts through green scrubland, pink eyes and pale hooves, adaptations to an existence without danger. The prison's presence protected more than donkeys. The island's ecosystems remained undisturbed while the rest of Sardinia developed, creating an inadvertent nature reserve. Prisoners worked in agriculture and animal husbandry, but were forbidden from hunting or disturbing wildlife, allowing species extinct elsewhere in Sardinia to persist here. The prison buildings now stand empty, their cells and walls slowly being reclaimed by vegetation, while the albino donkeys graze in courtyards where convicts once walked. The genetic mutation that creates albinism in these donkeys has been traced to a single female ancestor, making the entire population essentially clones with minimal genetic diversity, vulnerable to disease but protected by isolation. Lake Fusaro connects to the sea through two channels that Romans engineered with sluice gates 2,000 years ago, creating controllable salinity for what may be history's first aquaculture facility. The Romans discovered they could regulate salt levels to optimize oyster growth, opening gates during specific tides to maintain perfect brackish conditions. The lake itself occupies a former volcanic crater, its circular shape ideal for controlled water circulation. The ancient sluice gate foundations remain visible, cut channels in volcanic rock that show tool marks from bronze chisels. Romans built a small casino on a tiny island in the lake's center, connected by a narrow walkway, where they could monitor oyster beds and host elaborate banquets featuring fresh shellfish. The oyster cultivation technique developed here spread throughout the Roman Empire, making Fusaro the prototype for aquaculture operations from Britannia to Egypt. Today's lake maintains similar salinity levels through the same channels, though concrete has replaced Roman stonework. The volcanic minerals dissolved in the lake water contribute to oyster flavor, creating a terroir of the sea that gourmands claimed they could identify blindfolded. Fish species move between lake and sea following ancient patterns, their migrations timed to gate openings that have remained remarkably consistent across millennia. The Calanchi Badlands near Atri advance inland at 1 meter annually, creating a landscape where erosion becomes visible performance, earth sculpting itself into forms that change with every rainfall. These badlands formed when clay deposited 1 million years ago began eroding 350,000 years ago, the soft Pliocene sediments offering little resistance to water's insistence. The erosion creates knife-edge ridges separated by deep gullies, a landscape so hostile to vegetation that it appears lunar, gray clay baked white by summer sun. Each rain event carves new channels while erasing others, making maps obsolete within seasons. The clay contains marine fossils that weather out constantly, with shells and shark teeth appearing after storms like treasures from vanished seas. Local farmers have fought these badlands for centuries, building terraces and drainage systems that temporarily slow but never stop the erosion. Some gullies cut so deep they expose different geological layers, creating natural cross-sections where million-year-old history becomes visible. The sound of erosion is audible during rainstorms, a grinding, trickling percussion as tons of sediment move toward the Adriatic. Medieval towns built on ridges between badlands now perch on increasingly narrow peninsulas of stable ground, their foundations undermined grain by grain. Elba contains over 150 mineral species concentrated in just 10 square kilometers around Monte Capanna, where granite intrusion created one of Earth's most mineralogically diverse regions. This diversity arose from a unique geological event. When magma pushed through existing rocks, It created contact zones where extreme heat and pressure formed minerals found nowhere else. Collectors have identified everything from common quartz to rare beryl varieties, with new minerals still being discovered. The island's eastern mines, worked since Etruscan times for iron ore, reveal rainbow-colored oxidation zones where minerals paint abstract art on tunnel walls. Napoleon, during his exile here, became fascinated by the mineralogy, collecting specimens that he studied with the obsession of a man with too much time. Some minerals occur in crystals so perfect they seem artificially cut, particularly the tourmalines that form in cavities within pegmatite dikes. The variety is so extensive that geologists use Elba as a teaching laboratory, where students can find examples of almost every major mineral family within walking distance. Certain localities produce unique specimens, illvite crystals that exist nowhere else, or hematite roses that form only in specific temperature and pressure conditions that Elba's geology provided. The spring at Fonte Aretusa on Ortigia Island defies logic by flowing fresh water just meters from the Mediterranean, emerging through limestone from an aquifer that extends beneath the seafloor. This freshwater spring has flowed continuously for at least 3,000 years, mentioned in Greek myths as the transformed nymph Arethusa, who fled beneath the sea from Greece to Sicily. The water maintains constant temperature and flow rate regardless of rainfall, suggesting a deep source unaffected by surface conditions. Papyrus plants, supposedly planted by Ptolemy Thecon, grow around the spring, one of only 2 wild papyrus populations in Europe. The limestone through which the water rises acts as a natural filter, producing water of exceptional purity that ancient Greeks considered sacred. Chemical analysis reveals the water travels through rock formations that add specific minerals, creating a taste distinct enough that ancient writers could identify it. The spring's proximity to salt water creates a halocline visible where fresh and salt waters meet, a shimmering curtain that divides 2 worlds. Fish adapted to brackish water thrive in this mixing zone, species that can't survive in either pure fresh or pure salt water, existing only in this narrow margin between extremes. Mount Pelino preserves Bosnian pines that sprouted 1,200 years ago, making them Italy's oldest trees, their twisted forms recording centuries of wind, drought, and survival at 2,000 meters elevation. These pines, called loricato for their armor-like bark that resembles Roman military armor, grow in conditions that would kill most trees. The oldest individual, named Italis, has been dated to 1,230 years, its growth rings revealing climate patterns from medieval warm periods through the Little Ice Age. The trees survived because they grow where nothing else can, on exposed ridges where soil barely exists and winter winds can reach 200 kilometers per hour. Their wood is so resinous and dense that dead trees remain standing for centuries, becoming silver sculptures that slowly weather into abstract forms. These pines represent Ice Age refugia, populations that survived glaciation in protected pockets and never recolonized lower elevations. Each tree grows uniquely, twisted by prevailing winds into forms that appear tortured yet beautiful, natural bonsai shaped by centuries of atmospheric violence. The bark patterns are individual as fingerprints, deep fissures creating geometric designs that change as the tree grows, adding new polygons to an ever-expanding puzzle. The island of Salina formed from 6 volcanic cones that merged through successive eruptions, creating twin peaks that catch clouds and produce the only self-sufficient freshwater supply in the Aeolian archipelago. The peaks, Monte Fossa delle Felci and Monte dei Pori, rise high enough to force humid air upward where it cools and drops moisture, creating rainfall twice that of neighboring islands. This water, percolates through volcanic soil, emerging in springs that have allowed continuous habitation since prehistoric times. The volcanic soil's exceptional fertility, combined with reliable water, produces Malvasia grapes that create sweet wine, described by ancient writers as nectar of the gods. Between the peaks lies a saddle where volcanic activity created different soil types on opposite slopes, supporting distinct agricultural zones within walking distance. The island's name comes from salt ponds at Lingua, where seawater evaporation has been harvested since Greek times, though the volcanic soil adds minerals that create salt with unique properties. Underground, the volcanic structure creates natural cisterns where rainwater collects in impermeable rock bowls discovered by Romans who carved access tunnels still used today. The merging of 6 volcanoes created a complex topography where each valley has different microclimates, allowing tropical and temperate crops to grow on one small island. Lake Massakiukkele, near Lucca, floats mysteriously above sea level, held behind coastal dunes in a depression that should naturally drain to the nearby Mediterranean. The lake exists because of a delicate balance. Springs and rainfall input matching evaporation and seepage, maintained by impermeable clay layers that prevent complete drainage. Without human intervention, the lake would be saltwater, as storm surges would breach the dune barrier. But Roman-era channels and modern pumps maintain freshwater conditions. The lake depth averages just 2 meters, creating vast marshes that support Europe's largest butterfly populations, with 85 species recorded, including varieties found nowhere else in Italy. Puccini composed operas in a villa on the lake's shore, claiming the fog and bird calls inspired his melodies, and his piano remains positioned to overlook waters that haven't changed since his time. The shallow water warms quickly in summer, supporting lotus flowers supposedly descended from seeds brought by Egyptian merchants, though botanists suspect they're more recent introductions. Beneath the lake bed, archaeologists have found Roman villas and Etruscan settlements, evidence that water levels have fluctuated dramatically over millennia, with the current lake perhaps just the latest iteration of a geographical feature that appears and disappears with climate cycles. The Balzi Rossi caves near Ventimiglia preserve 25,000-year-old burial sites where Cro-Magnon humans created humanity's earliest known decorated graves. The bodies were covered in red ochre from iron oxide deposits in local rocks, the color possibly symbolizing blood or life, staining bones that remain tinted red millennia later. These caves, carved by waves when sea levels were different, provided shelter at a crucial point where coastal plains met mountain passes, a geographical bottleneck for Ice Age migrations. The deceased were buried with elaborate grave goods, seashell jewelry, stone, tools, and what appear to be ceremonial objects, suggesting complex beliefs about death and afterlife. One skeleton, the young prince, wore a cap decorated with hundreds of perforated shells and deer teeth, a garment that would have taken months to create. The ochre came from specific sites that required knowledge of geology and chemistry to locate and process, indicating sophisticated understanding of mineral properties. The caves also preserve evidence of the environment, pollen showing what plants grew, animal bones revealing diet, and sediment layers recording climate changes. The positioning of bodies, all facing the sea, suggests the ocean held spiritual significance for people who lived when the coastline was kilometers away. Sicily's Madoni Mountains shelter Abies nebrodensis firs, with only 30 trees surviving in a single valley, Europe's most critically endangered tree species. These firs are remnants of Ice Age forests that covered the Mediterranean basin when the climate was cooler and wetter. The trees survive at 2,500 meters in a valley that creates its own microclimate, trapping clouds and moisture that replicate conditions from 20,000 years ago. Each tree is genetically unique, having been isolated so long they've developed individual characteristics in bark patterns, needle arrangement, and cone shape. Conservation efforts include armed guards during seed production, as collectors would pay thousands for seeds from these rarest of trees. The trees grow incredibly slowly in their marginal habitat, adding perhaps a centimeter of height annually, making the largest specimens over 500 years old. Their isolation protected them from hybridization with other firs, preserving pure genetics from the Pleistocene. The valley where they grow, called Vallone Madonna degli Angeli, seems designed to preserve them, north-facing to minimize heat, steep-sided to trap moisture, and remote enough that shepherds rarely brought grazing animals. Local legend claims these are the last trees from the Garden of Eden, protected by angels who ensure their survival. The thermal springs of Bormio emerge at 1,280 meters in the Alps, heated by granite plutons that transfer geothermal energy through faults in metamorphic rock, creating hot water where snow falls 8 months annually. The springs produce water at temperatures from 37 to 43 degrees Celsius, each source following different underground paths that determine mineral content and temperature. Romans built elaborate bath complexes here, understanding that altitude enhanced the therapeutic effects, though they couldn't explain why lower air pressure increased blood circulation benefits. The granite heating the water crystallized 30 million years ago, but remains warm from radioactive decay of uranium and thorium traces, a natural nuclear reactor that will continue producing heat for millions of years. 9 different springs emerge within a small area, each with distinct chemical signatures indicating separate underground journeys through different rock types. Medieval pilgrims stopped here on alpine crossings, believing the waters had sacred properties, particularly one spring that deposited white minerals resembling rosary beads. The spring's reliability through recorded history suggests a massive heat reservoir that climate change and geological shifts haven't affected, a constant in a landscape where glaciers advance and retreat, where valleys fill with ice, then melt to meadows. Lake Verano on the Gargano Peninsula separated from the Adriatic when coastal currents built a 10-kilometer sand barrier, transforming a bay into Italy's largest coastal lake. This separation occurred gradually over 4,000 years, as longshore drift deposited sand faster than waves could remove it, eventually creating a barrier dune system that sealed the bay. The lake maintains brackish conditions through 2 artificial channels cut in Roman times, their engineers understanding that complete isolation would create a freshwater lake that would overflow, while complete connection would create a useless saltwater bay. The depth reaches only 5 meters maximum, but the lake covers 60 square kilometers, creating vast, shallow waters that warm quickly and support enormous eel populations. These eels migrate to the Sargasso Sea to spawn, somehow navigating from this enclosed lake to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a journey that still mystifies biologists. The barrier beach continues growing eastward at 2 meters annually, gradually extending the lake while potentially threatening to close the artificial outlets. Beneath the lakebed, core samples reveal alternating layers of marine and freshwater sediments, recording times when the barrier was breached by storms and subsequently rebuilt by currents. The island of Tavolara rises as a limestone mountain 565 meters straight from the sea, its vertical cliffs creating unique weather patterns where clouds form at the summit even on clear days. The limestone formed from Jurassic coral reefs, compressed and uplifted until the reef became a mountain, its vertical faces still showing fossil corals in their growth positions. The cliffs are so sheer that they create standing waves in the air, forcing wind upward where it cools and condenses, creating the island's characteristic crown of clouds. These lenticular clouds remain stationary while wind flows through them, appearing solid but constantly renewed, a phenomenon pilots use as a wind direction indicator. The island's profile resembles a table, hence its name, though from certain angles it appears as a sleeping giant or stranded ship. King Carlo Alberto of Sardinia recognized the island as an independent kingdom in 1836, after meeting the Bertoleone family who claimed sovereignty, making it perhaps the world's smallest kingdom, though Italy never officially recognized this status. The limestone contains caves that penetrate completely through the mountain, creating blowholes where storm waves compress air that erupts from openings hundreds of meters above sea level. Castellana Caves extend 3,848 meters through Cretaceous limestone, containing formations so pure and white they appear to glow from within when illuminated. The White Cave, the system's most spectacular chamber, contains alabaster stalactites and stalagmites of such translucence that light passes through them like frozen fiber optics. This exceptional purity results from water filtering through limestone with almost no clay or iron content, depositing pure calcium carbonate without color-causing impurities. The caves formed over 90 million years as acidic water dissolved limestone along fracture planes, creating chambers connected by passages that follow the rock's structural weaknesses. The largest chamber, called the grave, opens as a natural skylight where the ceiling collapsed millennia ago, allowing surface plants to grow at the bottom of a 60-meter pit. Temperature remains constant at 16 degrees Celsius, creating conditions where certain formations grow in ways impossible in fluctuating temperatures, developing crystalline structures of extraordinary delicacy. The acoustic properties allow a whisper to travel hundreds of meters, while certain chambers resonate at specific frequencies, creating natural amphitheaters where concerts are held. Blind cave fish and underground pools have evolved without eyes or pigmentation, their entire existence spent in absolute darkness. The Ombrone River in Tuscany meanders so extensively that it travels 160 kilometers to cover a straight-line distance of just 50 kilometers to reach the sea. These meanders developed because the river flows through soft sediments that offer little resistance to lateral erosion, allowing the channel to swing back and forth across its valley like a pendulum recording geological time. Some meander loops have grown so extreme they're close to cutting through their necks, which would abandon the loops as oxbow lakes. The river carries enormous sediment loads from erosion of clay hills, turning water the color of chocolate during floods. This sediment has built a delta that advances into the Tyrrhenian Sea, creating new land from eroded hills, geography redistributing itself grain by grain. Historical maps show the river has completely changed course several times, abandoning channels that are now followed by roads that curve mysteriously through straight valleys. The meanders create diverse habitats, fast water on outer bends, still pools on inner curves, sandbars, and mud banks, each supporting different species. During summer, the river nearly disappears, flowing underground through its own sediments, leaving pools where fish concentrate, waiting for autumn rains to reconnect their world. Mount Argentario was an island until ocean currents created 3 sand tombolos connecting it to the mainland, with the central tombolo supporting the town of Orbitello. These sand bridges formed through a process called littoral drift, where waves approaching at angles moved sand along the coast until it encountered the island, then deposited it in the lee, where wave energy decreased. The process took approximately 5,000 years, gradually building 3 separate connections that transformed an island into a peninsula. Orbitello sits on the central tombolo, making it the only Italian town built entirely on a sandbar between 2 lagoons. The northern and southern tombolos, called Tombolo della Famiglia and Tombolo della Janella, continue growing, extending into the sea at approximately 1 meter per year. The lagoons trapped behind these sand barriers create unique ecosystems where flamingos feed in water too shallow for most predators. The original island geology, granite and limestone, rises to 635 meters at Punta Telegrafo, high enough to create its own weather patterns distinct from the mainland. Spanish fortifications on the mountain took advantage of its former island status, building defenses that assumed attack from the sea, not anticipating that sand would eventually provide land bridges for armies. The island of Linosa formed from volcanic activity along the African continental shelf, creating a piece of Africa in Italian waters where black sand beaches form from pulverized basalt. The volcanism occurred where the African plate bends downward, creating weakness that allowed magma to escape, building an island that belongs geologically to Africa while politically to Europe. The black sand absorbs so much solar heat that summer temperatures can reach 70 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cook eggs, forcing sea turtles to nest only at night. The basalt weathers into exceptionally fertile soil that supports agriculture despite minimal rainfall, with farmers growing crops in circular depressions called grottoni that trap moisture and protect plants from wind. The island's position on the African shelf means it experiences different seismic activity than the European volcanic islands, with earthquakes originating from African tectonic movements. Marine life around Linosa includes African species rarely seen elsewhere in the Mediterranean, having colonized from the Tunisian coast just 160 kilometers south. The volcanic cones, extinct for 2,000 years, have weathered into perfect circles that collect rainwater, creating temporary lakes that appear and disappear with precipitation, supporting endemic plant species adapted to extreme wet-dry cycles. Lake Averno near Naples occupies a volcanic crater that Romans believed was the entrance to the underworld. Its waters once so toxic from volcanic gases that birds flying overhead would die and fall into the lake. The Greek name Aornos, meaning without birds, became Avernus in Latin, then Averno in Italian, preserving the memory of toxic times. The gases, primarily carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, emerged from fumaroles on the lake floor, accumulating in the crater bowl during still weather until concentrations became lethal. Romans cleared surrounding forests to improve ventilation and built a tunnel to the sea, reducing gas accumulation and making the lake habitable. The circular shape and steep crater walls create acoustic effects that amplify sounds, making whispers seem to come from the depths, reinforcing beliefs about underground spirits. Agrippa converted the lake into a naval port in 37 BCE, connecting it to the sea through a canal, though the project was abandoned when volcanic activity made the harbor unstable. Today, the lake appears peaceful. Its toxic emissions long ceased, but carbon dioxide occasionally still bubbles through the water, reminding visitors that the volcanic system beneath remains active, merely sleeping rather than dead. The Gola del Furlo preserves scratch marks from brown bears extinct in central Italy since 1700, etched into limestone at heights revealing ancient cave entrances now sealed by time. These scratches reach 3 meters above current ground level, carved by bears standing upright to mark territory or sharpen claws against the soft limestone. The rock here proved perfect for preservation, soft enough to record the scratches, yet hard enough to protect them from centuries of weathering. Multiple generations of bears used identical marking spots, creating overlapping patterns that deepen with each use, some grooves worn centimeters into stone. The height of certain marks suggests massive individuals, perhaps males displaying dominance, reaching heights that would tower above modern European bears. Cave entrances these bears used for winter dens remain visible as shadowed depressions in cliff faces, though most have collapsed or filled with debris. Local folklore transformed these marks into dragon scratches, the bears themselves grown mythical in memory. Rangers still discover new scratch sites after heavy rains wash cliff faces clean, revealing signatures of animals that vanished before Italy was unified. The limestone continues to tell stories of an ecosystem that included megafauna, when these gorges echoed with roars instead of traffic. Mount Subazio's pink limestone glows at sunrise and sunset, quarried from slopes where Jurassic seas compressed billions of microscopic shells into stone tinged with iron oxide. This Scaglia Rossa limestone gives Assisi its distinctive rose color, buildings that seem to blush in changing light. The stone formed 150 million years ago when this region lay beneath tropical waters, accumulating foraminifera shells that would eventually become architectural material for medieval saints. Iron traces within the limestone oxidize differently depending on exposure, creating variations from pearl pink to deep salmon. Quarrying techniques haven't changed substantially since Roman times, following natural bedding planes where the stone splits cleanly. The limestone possesses an unusual property. It actually hardens with atmospheric exposure, growing more durable over centuries, which explains why Assisi's oldest structures often appear newer than recent buildings. Rain temporarily deepens the color to burgundy, entire towns shifting hue with weather. The stone breathes, absorbing and releasing moisture in ways that naturally regulate building humidity. Chert nodules scattered through the limestone catch light like embedded diamonds, giving facades a subtle sparkle. Medieval builders selected specific quarry faces for important buildings, understanding that stone from different locations had distinct colors, choosing their palette from the mountain itself. The island of Asinara preserved albino donkeys through an accident of history, a prison colony's isolation creating an inadvertent genetic laboratory. These white donkeys descended from Egyptian imports in the 1800s, their albinism spreading through the isolated population until it became the dominant trait. With pink eyes and white coats, they move through Mediterranean scrubland like creatures from mythology, their lack of pigmentation causing no disadvantage on an island without predators. The prison, operational until 1997, protected more than just donkeys. Guards prevented hunting and development, allowing ecosystems to remain undisturbed while Sardinia transformed around them. Prisoners cultivated gardens and tended livestock, but couldn't disturb wildlife, creating strange harmony between incarceration and conservation. The genetic bottleneck that produced albinism makes the population vulnerable, essentially clones descended from a single female ancestor. Scientists study these donkeys to understand how isolation affects evolution, living examples of genetic drift visible in their pale forms. Empty prison buildings now crumble, while donkeys graze in former exercise yards, their white forms contrasting against weathered concrete. The island's name means Donkey Island in Latin, though whether this referred to the shape or inhabitants remains debated. Lake Fusaro's Roman aquaculture system still functions after 2 millennia. Ancient sluice gates controlling salinity for oyster cultivation with precision that modern engineering rarely improves upon. Romans discovered the perfect brackish balance by opening gates during specific tidal conditions, maintaining salinity levels that optimized shellfish growth. The lake occupies a former volcanic crater, its circular shape ideal for controlled circulation. Original sluice gate foundations cut into volcanic rock still show bronze chisel marks, channels worn smooth by 2,000 years of flowing water. A small casino built on the lake's central island allowed Romans to monitor oyster beds while hosting elaborate banquets featuring shellfish harvested moments before serving. The techniques developed here spread throughout the empire, making Fusaro the prototype for aquaculture from Britain to Egypt. Volcanic minerals dissolved in the water contribute distinctive flavors to oysters, creating what gourmands called terroir of the sea. Fish migrate between lake and sea following patterns established by Roman gate operations, their movements so predictable that fishermen still use Roman timing. Modern concrete has replaced some stonework, but the fundamental system remains unchanged, ancient engineering still superior to proposed improvements. The Calanchi Badlands near Atri advance inland like slow-motion avalanches, gray clay hills eroding at rates visible within human lifetimes. These formations began when Pliocene clay deposited 1 million years ago started eroding 350,000 years ago, soft sediments offering minimal resistance to water's persistence. Each rainfall carves new channels while erasing others, creating a landscape that reinvents itself seasonally. The erosion rate of 1 meter annually means maps become obsolete within years. Clay baked white by summer sun turns to flowing mud in winter rains, entire hillsides liquefying and sliding toward the Adriatic. Marine fossils weather constantly from the clay, shells, shark teeth, and whale bones appearing after storms, like messages from vanished seas. Medieval towns built on stable ridges between badlands now perch on peninsulas of solid ground, their foundations undermined grain by grain. Farmers have fought these advancing wastelands for centuries, building terraces that temporarily slow but never stop the erosion. The sound of erosion becomes audible during storms, a grinding, trickling symphony as tons of sediment move seaward. Some gullies cut so deep they expose different geological epochs, natural cross-sections where millions of years become visible in vertical walls. Elba concentrates over 150 mineral species in just 10 square kilometers around Monte Capan, a diversity created when granite magma invaded existing rocks under extreme conditions. This geological violence produced contact zones where temperature and pressure formed minerals found nowhere else on Earth. Collectors have documented everything from common quartz to rare beryl varieties, with new minerals still being discovered in abandoned mine tunnels. Rainbow oxidation zones paint tunnel walls where different minerals weather at different rates. Napoleon, during his exile, became obsessed with collecting specimens, studying them with the intensity of a man with excess time. Some minerals form crystals so perfect they appear artificially cut, particularly tourmalines that grew in pegmatite cavities. The eastern iron mines, worked since Etruscan times, revealed geological art galleries where minerals create abstract patterns. Ilvite crystals occur nowhere else, while hematite forms roses that bloom in stone. The variety is so extensive that geology students can find examples of almost every mineral family within walking distance. Certain locations produce unique specimens, spots where exact conditions existed for specific crystal formation, never to be repeated once mining disturbed the delicate underground environment. Fonte Aretusa on Ortigia Island flows fresh water meters from the Mediterranean, emerging through limestone from an aquifer extending beneath the seafloor. Greek mythology claimed the nymph Arethusa fled beneath the sea from Greece to Sicily, transformed into this spring. The water maintains constant temperature and flow regardless of rainfall, suggesting a deep source unaffected by surface conditions. Papyrus grows around the spring, supposedly planted by Ptolemy II, one of only 2 wild papyrus populations in Europe. The limestone filtration produces water of exceptional purity that ancients considered sacred. Chemical analysis shows the water acquires specific minerals during its underground journey, creating a taste distinct enough that ancient writers could identify it blindfolded. Where fresh meets salt water, a visible halocline shimmers, dividing 2 aquatic worlds. Fish adapted to brackish conditions thrive only in this mixing zone, unable to survive in either pure environment. The spring's reliability through 3 millennia of climate variation suggests a massive aquifer that taps ancient water, perhaps trapped when Sicily was connected to Africa. Byzantine mosaics near the spring depict it as Paradise's fountain, water emerging from the underworld purified. Mount Pollino harbors Bosnian pines that germinated 1,130 years ago. Italy's oldest trees twisted into living sculptures by centuries of mountain weather. These pines, called loricato, for bark resembling Roman armor, survive where nothing else can grow, on ridges where soil barely exists. The oldest individual, named Italus, reveals through growth rings the complete climate history from medieval warm periods through the Little Ice Age to current warming. Each tree grows uniquely, shaped by prevailing winds into forms that appear tortured yet beautiful. Natural bonsai, sculpted by atmospheric violence. Their wood contains so much resin that dead trees remain standing for centuries, becoming silver monuments that slowly weather into abstract art. The bark patterns are individual as fingerprints, deep polygonal fissures that expand with growth, adding new geometry annually. These pines represent Ice Age refugia, populations that survived glaciation in protected pockets. Growing at 2,000 meters, where winter winds reach 200 kilometers per hour, they lean uniformly eastward, all bowing to the same invisible force. Lightning strikes that would kill normal trees merely scar these pines, adding character to their already dramatic forms. The island of Salina merged from 6 separate volcanic cones that created twin peaks high enough to harvest clouds, producing the Aeolian archipelago's only reliable freshwater. Monte Fossa delle Felci and Monte dei Pori force humid air upward where it condenses, creating rainfall double that of neighboring islands. This water percolates through volcanic soil, emerging in springs that have supported continuous habitation since Neolithic times. The exceptional fertility from volcanic soil combined with reliable water produces Malvasia grapes that ancient writers called divine nectar. Between the peaks, a saddle divides the island into distinct agricultural zones, different soil types supporting different crops within walking distance. Salt ponds at Lingua gave the island its name, where Romans harvested sea salt enriched with volcanic minerals. Underground, the merged volcanic structure creates natural cisterns in impermeable rock bowls discovered by Romans who carved access tunnels still used today. Each former volcano contributed different minerals to the soil, creating a patchwork of agricultural potential. The complexity of 6 merged cones produces microclimates in every valley, tropical plants growing alongside temperate species. Springs emerge where different lava flows meet, their boundaries creating natural aquifers. Lake Massachiaccoli near Lucca exists suspended above sea level, maintained behind dunes by hydrological balance that defies gravity. Springs and rainfall exactly match evaporation and seepage through clay layers that prevent complete drainage. Without human intervention, storm surges would breach the dunes, turning the lake to salt water. Roman channels and modern pumps maintain freshwater conditions in what should be a lagoon. The depth averages just 2 meters, creating vast marshes supporting Europe's largest butterfly diversity, 85 species, including endemics. Puccini composed operas in his lakeside villa, claiming fog patterns and bird songs inspired his melodies. His piano remains positioned overlooking waters unchanged since his time. Shallow water warms quickly in summer, supporting lotus flowers that legend claims descended from Egyptian merchant seeds. Beneath the lakebed, archaeologists find Roman villas and Etruscan settlements, evidence of dramatic water level fluctuations. The current lake may be just the latest iteration of a feature that appears and disappears with climate cycles. Morning mists create ethereal landscapes where reality dissolves, understanding why Puccini found inspiration here. Reed beds whisper with winds that haven't changed in centuries. The Balzi Rossi caves near Ventimiglia preserve humanity's earliest decorated graves, where Cro-Magnon peoples created elaborate burials 25,000 years ago. Bodies were covered in red ochre from local iron oxide deposits, staining bones crimson for millennia. The young prince skeleton wore a cap decorated with hundreds of perforated shells and deer teeth. Months of work for a single garment. These caves, carved when sea levels differed, provided shelter at a geographic bottleneck for Ice Age migrations. Grave goods included tools, jewelry, and ceremonial objects, suggesting complex afterlife beliefs. The ochre required sophisticated knowledge to locate and process specific iron deposits. All bodies faced the sea, though the coastline then lay kilometers away. The caves preserve environmental evidence: pollen revealing vegetation, bones showing diet, sediments recording climate. Modern excavations proceed millimeter by millimeter, each level revealing older chapters of human presence. The red ochre may have symbolized blood or life, a tradition that spread across Paleolithic Europe. Some burials included marine shells from species now found only in tropical waters, evidence of dramatic climate shifts. Sicily's Madoni Mountains protect Europe's most endangered trees, just 30 Abies nebradensis firs surviving in a single valley. These trees are Ice Age relics from when the Mediterranean was cooler and wetter. They survive at 1,500 meters in Vallone Madonna degli Angeli, a valley creating its own microclimate. Each tree is genetically unique after millennia of isolation, with individual bark patterns and cone shapes. Armed guards protect them during seed season, as collectors would pay fortunes for seeds. Growing just centimeters annually, the largest specimens are over 500 years old. The valley seems designed for their preservation, north-facing to minimize heat, steep-sided to trap moisture, remote enough to avoid grazing. Isolation prevented hybridization with other firs, preserving Pleistocene genetics. Local legend claims these are Eden's last trees, protected by angels. Their extreme rarity makes every seed precious, each potentially representing unique adaptations. Conservation efforts include cloning and seed banking, racing against time. The tree's survival through climate changes that eliminated forests across the Mediterranean suggests remarkable resilience. Bormeo's thermal springs emerge at 1,280 meters, where snow falls 8 months annually, heated by granite plutons, transferring geothermal energy through metamorphic faults. 9 springs produce water from 37 to 43 degrees Celsius, each following different underground paths determining mineral content. Romans built elaborate baths here, understanding that altitude enhanced therapeutic effects through lower air pressure, increasing circulation benefits. The granite heat source crystallized 30 million years ago, but remains warm from radioactive decay of uranium and thorium traces, a natural reactor producing heat for millions of years. Each spring has distinct chemical signatures from journeys through different rocks. Medieval pilgrims believed certain springs had sacred properties, particularly one depositing minerals resembling rosary beads. The spring's consistency through recorded history suggests massive heat reservoirs unaffected by climate variations. Water emerging today fell as rain centuries ago, slowly percolating through rock while absorbing minerals. Some springs bubble with dissolved gases, creating natural jacuzzis. The combination of altitude, mineral content, and temperature creates unique therapeutic conditions found nowhere else in the Alps. Lake Verano separated from the Adriatic when longshore drift built a 10-kilometer sand barrier, Italy's largest coastal lake formed by currents rather than geology. The separation occurred over 4,000 years as sand accumulated faster than waves could remove it. Roman engineers cut 2 channels maintaining brackish conditions, understanding that complete isolation would overflow, while full connection would create a useless saltwater bay. Despite reaching only 5 meters depth, the lake covers 60 square kilometers of warm shallows supporting enormous eel populations. These eels somehow navigate to the Sargasso Sea to spawn, a journey from enclosed lake to mid-Atlantic that mystifies biologists. The barrier beach grows eastward at 2 meters annually, potentially threatening the outlets. Core samples reveal alternating marine and freshwater sediments, recording barrier breaches and rebuilding. Flamingos feed in shallow lagoons, their pink coloration intensified by local shrimp species. Fishing traditions here predate Rome, with techniques passed through generations unchanged. The lake acts as a nursery for species that mature in the Adriatic, a halfway house between river and sea. Tavolara Island thrusts limestone cliffs 565 meters straight from the sea, creating its own weather where lenticular clouds form even on clear days. The limestone contains Jurassic coral reefs, their growth positions still visible in vertical cliff faces. Sheer walls create standing airwaves that force wind upward where it condenses, producing stationary clouds that appear solid while constantly renewing. The table-like profile gave the island its name, though from certain angles it resembles a sleeping giant. Carlo Alberto of Sardinia recognized the Bertoleone family as kings of Tavolara in 1836, perhaps the world's smallest kingdom. Caves penetrate completely through the mountain, storm waves compressing air that erupts from openings hundreds of meters above sea level. The limestone's purity creates white cliffs visible from Sardinia, a natural lighthouse. Peregrine falcons nest in cliff faces, diving at speeds approaching 300 kilometers per hour. The summit's isolation preserved pre-human plant communities, species that colonized when sea levels were lower. Navigation charts warn of downdrafts near the cliffs that can pull small aircraft dangerously downward. Castellana caves showcase formations so pure they glow internally when illuminated. Alabaster stalactites and stalagmites of unprecedented translucence. The White Cave contains formations where light passes through like frozen fiber optics. This purity results from water filtering through clay-free limestone, depositing calcium carbonate without impurities. The caves formed over 90 million years along fracture plains in Cretaceous limestone. The grave chamber opens as a natural skylight, where surface plants grow 60 meters underground. Constant 16-degree temperatures allow formations to develop crystalline structures of extraordinary delicacy. Blind cave fish evolved in underground pools, their entire existence in absolute darkness. Acoustic properties allow whispers to travel hundreds of meters, certain chambers resonating at specific frequencies. Formations grow 1 millimeter per decade, the largest representing 500,000 years of accumulation. Some stalactites are thin as straws, hollow tubes where water descends drop by drop. The caves were discovered when a speleologist noticed cool air emerging from a crack, following the draft into chambers unseen since their formation. The Ombrone River in Tuscany travels 160 kilometers to cover 50 kilometers of straight-line distance, meandering like a snake learning geometry. These extreme meanders developed in soft sediments, offering little resistance to lateral erosion. Some loops nearly complete circles, close to cutting through their necks to abandon oxbow lakes. The river carries enormous sediment loads, turning chocolate brown during floods. Historical maps show complete course changes, abandoned channels now followed by mysteriously curving roads through straight valleys. Meanders create diverse habitats: fast water on outer bends, still pools inside, sandbars, and mud banks. Summer flow nearly disappears, the river traveling underground through its own sediments, leaving pools where fish concentrate awaiting autumn rains. The meandering increases the river's length threefold, slowing water flow and increasing floodplain fertility. Ancient Etruscans tried to straighten sections, their abandoned channels still visible as depressions. Each flood reshapes the river slightly, geography rewriting itself seasonally. The delta advances into the Tyrrhenian Sea, new land built from eroded hills. Mount Argentario connected to the mainland through 3 sand tombolos built by ocean currents over 5,000 years, transforming island into peninsula. Littoral drift deposited sand in the island's lee, where wave energy decreased, gradually building bridges. Orbitello sits on the central tombolo, the only Italian town built entirely on a sandbar between lagoons. The tombolos continue growing at 1 meter annually, extending seaward. Behind these sand barriers, lagoons support flamingo populations in water too shallow for predators. The original island rises to 635 meters, high enough to create distinct weather from the mainland. Spanish fortifications assumed attack from sea, not anticipating sand would provide land bridges. The northern and southern tombolos, Feniglia and Gianella, protect different ecosystems: pine forest on one, wetlands on the other. Storm waves sometimes overwash the tombolos, temporarily recreating island conditions. The lagoons trap sediment that would otherwise flow to sea, gradually filling and requiring dredging. Roman fish farms operated in these protected waters, their containing walls still visible at low tide. Linosa Island represents a piece of Africa in Italian waters, formed from volcanism on the African continental shelf, where black sand beaches tell of basaltic origins. The African plate's downward bend created weakness for magma escape, building an island geologically African but politically European. Black sand absorbs such heat that summer temperatures reach 70 degrees Celsius, forcing sea turtles to nest nocturnally. Basalt weathers into exceptionally fertile soil, supporting agriculture despite minimal rainfall. Farmers grow crops in gratoni, circular depressions trapping moisture and protecting from wind. The island experiences African seismic patterns rather than European volcanic activity. Marine life includes African species rarely seen elsewhere in the Mediterranean, colonizers from Tunisia, 160 kilometers south. Extinct volcanic cones weathered into perfect circles collect rainwater in temporary lakes, supporting endemic plants adapted to extreme wet-dry cycles. The isolation preserved pre-human ecosystems, though introduced species now threaten native communities. Houses painted in bright colors help fishermen identify home from sea, a tradition predating navigational equipment. Lake Averno occupies a volcanic crater where Romans located the underworld's entrance, its waters once toxic enough to kill overflying birds. The name preserves this memory. Greek aornos, meaning without birds, becoming Avernus, then Averno. Volcanic gases, primarily carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, accumulated in the crater bowl during still weather until concentrations became lethal. Romans cleared forests and built tunnels to improve ventilation, making the lake habitable. Agrippa converted it to a naval port in 37 BCE, connecting to the sea through canals abandoned when volcanism made the harbor unstable. The circular crater creates acoustic effects, amplifying sounds from the depths, reinforcing underworld beliefs. Nero had a palace here, using thermal springs that still bubble through the lake floor. Medieval legends claimed Virgil gained magical powers by swimming across at midnight. Today's peaceful appearance masks continuing volcanic activity, occasional carbon dioxide bubbles reminding visitors of dormant dangers below. The lake maintains constant temperature through geothermal heating, never freezing despite mountain surroundings. Local birds still avoid flying directly over the center, perhaps genetic memory of ancient dangers. And so, we've wandered through Italy's hidden geography, from alpine valleys that mirror the sun to underwater ruins that remember empire, from coral peaks that once knew tropical seas to volcanic islands that pulse with Earth's inner fire. Each fact we've visited tonight reveals how this peninsula is not merely land, but a library of geological stories, written in travertine and tuff, in marble and volcanic ash. Italy's geography whispers of timescales beyond human memory, of African plates meeting Europe, of seas advancing and retreating, of mountains rising from ocean floors. We've seen limestone that formed from Jurassic coral, thermal springs that match the temperature of blood, lakes that breathe with volcanic force, and trees that have stood for more than a millennium, recording climate in their rings. These 100 glimpses remind us that beneath every vineyard and piazza lies a deeper story, one measured not in centuries, but in millions of years, where every stone has traveled impossible distances to rest exactly where it does tonight. Geography here is not static, but living, constantly reshaping itself through erosion and deposition, through volcanic breath and tectonic shifts. May these geographical mysteries follow you into sleep, and may you dream of hidden caves, forgotten islands, and mountains that remember being seafloor. Until next time, this has been Midnight Geography. Sleep well.